The desert world of Colchis hung like a bronze coin against the void, its surface scarred by millennia of religious warfare and theological purges. Here, beneath twin suns that bleached the sand white and turned the air to shimmering waves of heat, the infant primarch who would become known as Lorgar Aurelian fell from the heavens in a pod of unknown origin. The impact crater still smoldered when the first scavengers arrived, drawn by the strange lights that had torn across Colchis's perpetual twilight sky. Among those who witnessed the arrival was Corpharon, a priest-warrior of the Covenant, the theocratic regime that had dominated Colchis for over 1,000 years. Where others saw only twisted metal and alien technology, Corpharon recognized divine providence. The child within the pod bore the unmistakable marks of otherworldly origin, skin that seemed to glow with inner light, eyes that held depths beyond mortal comprehension, and a presence that made even hardened warriors kneel in reverence. Corpharon claimed the infant as his own, naming him Lorgar and raising him within the labyrinthine hierarchy of the Covenant's religious order. The Covenant itself represented everything that had driven Colchis into centuries of stagnation and bloodshed. Built upon the worship of the primordial truth, a pantheon of entities that demanded constant sacrifice and ritual observance, the theocracy maintained power through a combination of religious fervor and brutal suppression of dissent. The priest castes lived in towering ziggurats that rose from the desert like artificial mountains, their walls carved with countless names of gods and demons, while the common people scraped existence from the harsh sands below. Sacred texts spoke of entities beyond the veil of reality, beings of immense power who whispered secrets to those faithful enough to listen. Corpharon himself embodied the contradictions of the Covenant's rule. A man of genuine faith who had spent decades studying the ancient texts, he possessed both the political acumen to navigate the treacherous waters of Colchian theology and the military experience to enforce religious doctrine through force of arms. His scarred hands bore the ritual brands of his office, while his eyes held the fervent gleam of one who had gazed too long into mysteries not meant for mortal comprehension. In the foundling Lorgar, he saw not merely a son, but a vessel through which the primordial truth might manifest its will upon Colchis. Under Corpharon's tutelage, Lorgar grew with supernatural speed, his mind absorbing theological concepts that had taken scholars' lifetimes to master. The boy displayed an intuitive understanding of faith's power, demonstrating abilities that bordered on the miraculous. He could inspire absolute devotion with mere words, heal grievous wounds through touch, and perceive truths hidden from normal human senses. Yet even as Lorgar excelled in his studies of the Covenant's doctrine, something within him rebelled against the fractured nature of their beliefs. The pantheon of the primordial truth felt incomplete to him, a collection of competing voices rather than a unified divine will. The turning point came during Lorgar's 18th year, when he experienced the first of his great visions. Standing atop the highest spire of the Temple of the Covenant, gazing out across the endless desert, Lorgar felt his consciousness expand beyond the confines of his physical form. In that moment of transcendence, he perceived a singular divine presence of overwhelming power and benevolence, a golden figure whose very existence rendered the squabbling entities of the primordial truth as mere shadows. This was the one God, the true deity whose light could unite not just Colchis, but all of humanity under a single, perfect faith. The revelation transformed Lorgar from dutiful student into revolutionary prophet. He began preaching a new doctrine that proclaimed the falseness of the Covenant's pantheon and the supremacy of the one God. His words carried such conviction and power that crowds gathered wherever he spoke, their hearts ignited by the promise of salvation through unified faith. The common people, long oppressed by the competing demands of countless deities, found hope in Lorgar's message of singular devotion. Even some within the Covenant's own ranks began to question their ancient beliefs, swayed by the young prophet's undeniable charisma and the miraculous events that seemed to follow in his wake. Corpharon watched his adopted son's transformation with a mixture of pride and growing unease. The man who had raised Lorgar from infancy recognized the divine nature of the youth's calling, yet he also understood the political realities of Colchian society. The Covenant's power structure depended entirely upon the maintenance of the primordial truth's complex theological framework. To abandon that system in favor of monotheistic worship would mean the destruction of everything the priest castes had built over centuries of careful manipulation and control. The conflict between old faith and new revelation came to a head when the Covenant's ruling council declared Lorgar a heretic and ordered his immediate execution. The young prophet's response demonstrated both his tactical brilliance and his absolute commitment to his divine mission. Rather than flee or submit, Lorgar called upon his growing following to rise up against their oppressors. The war that followed would reshape Colchis forever, transforming a world of fractured beliefs into a unified theocracy dedicated to the worship of the one God. Lorgar's military campaigns across Colchis revealed another aspect of his superhuman nature. He possessed an intuitive understanding of warfare that allowed him to outmaneuver opponents with vastly superior numbers and resources. His strategies combined conventional tactics with psychological warfare, using his followers' religious fervor as both weapon and shield. Cities that had stood unconquered for millennia fell before his advance, their defenders either converted to his cause or swept aside by the righteous fury of true believers. The physical transformation of Colchis under Lorgar's rule proved as dramatic as the spiritual revolution he had unleashed. The ancient ziggurats of the Covenant were torn down or converted into temples dedicated to the one God. The countless shrines and altars that had once honored the entities of the primordial truth were destroyed, their stones used to build new monuments celebrating unified faith. Across the desert world, massive construction projects began as Lorgar's followers labored to create physical manifestations of their devotion. Towering cathedrals whose spires reached toward the heavens, vast libraries where the new scriptures could be preserved and studied, and training grounds where warrior priests learned to fight in the name of their singular deity. Throughout this period of conquest and reconstruction, Kor Pharon remained at Lorgar's side, his own faith gradually shifting to accommodate his adopted son's revelations. The older man's practical experience proved invaluable in organizing the new theocracy's administrative structure, while his knowledge of Colchian politics helped identify potential threats and allies. Yet even as he served faithfully, Kor Pharon never fully abandoned his fascination with the old ways. In secret chambers beneath the new temples, he preserved texts and artifacts from the Covenant era, telling himself that such knowledge might prove useful in defending against future heresies. The arrival of the Emperor of Mankind on Colchis marked the culmination of Lorgar's prophetic vision and the beginning of a new chapter in his extraordinary life. When the golden figure descended from the heavens accompanied by his gene-forged warriors, Lorgar immediately recognized him as the one God whose image had inspired his revolution. The meeting between father and son took place in the great cathedral that now dominated Colchis's capital, its walls lined with frescoes depicting the emperor's divine nature and humanity's destiny among the stars. The emperor's reaction to Lorgar's theological interpretation of their relationship proved more complex than the young primarch had anticipated. While clearly pleased by his son's achievements in unifying Colchis, the master of mankind expressed reservations about the religious framework through which that unity had been achieved. The imperial truth, the emperor explained, rejected the notion of divine worship in favor of scientific rationalism and human achievement. Gods and demons were merely labels applied to forces beyond current understanding, not entities worthy of reverence or fear. This philosophical tension would define much of Lorgar's subsequent relationship with his father, though in those early days of reunion, both chose to focus on their shared goals rather than their ideological differences. The emperor had come to Colchis not merely to reclaim his lost son, but to offer Lorgar command of the 17th Legion, the Imperial Heralds, one of 20 Space Marine formations created from the Primarch's own genetic template. These warriors had fought across the galaxy for decades, spreading the Emperor's truth through conquest and compliance, yet they lacked the focused purpose that only their gene father could provide. The transformation of the Imperial Heralds into the Word-Bearers reflected both Lorgar's theological convictions and his understanding of warfare's spiritual dimensions. Where the Legion had once served as the Emperor's secular messengers, proclaiming the imperial truth through deed and declaration, they would now become evangelists of a deeper faith. The Word-Bearers would carry not just the Emperor's political authority, but his divine mandate to unite humanity under a single, perfect creed. Lorgar's first meeting with his Gene sons took place in the vast parade grounds of the Legion's fortress monastery, a structure that had been hastily expanded to accommodate the influx of new recruits from Colchis. The Primarch stood before thousands of warriors whose faces bore his own features in subtle variation, each one a living testament to the Emperor's mastery of genetic manipulation. These Space Marines had been created from Lorgar's own essence, their enhanced physiology carrying echoes of his supernatural abilities, yet they had spent decades fighting without understanding their true purpose. The speech Lorgar delivered that day would be remembered and recited by word-bearers for millennia to come. He spoke of faith's power to transform not just individuals, but entire civilizations, of the Emperor's divine nature and humanity's destiny to inherit the galaxy through righteous conquest. His words carried the same compelling force that had won him Colchis, igniting something deep within the Space Marines' enhanced minds. For the first time since their creation, the warriors of the 17th Legion felt truly complete, their existence given meaning beyond mere military efficiency. The integration of Colchian recruits into the Legion's ranks proceeded with remarkable smoothness, despite the cultural differences between the desert world's warrior priests and the more secular traditions of Terra and Mars. Lorgar's careful attention to both groups' concerns helped bridge potential divisions, while his own example demonstrated how faith and martial prowess could enhance rather than conflict with each other. Veterans of the Imperial Heralds found themselves reinvigorated by their new brother's passionate devotion, while Colchian recruits learned to channel their religious fervor through the disciplined structures of Space Marine warfare. The Legion's new identity manifested itself in countless ways, from the modification of their armor's iconography to the development of new combat doctrines that emphasized the spiritual aspects of warfare. Where other legions might view battle as a purely tactical exercise, the word-bearers understood each engagement as an opportunity to demonstrate their faith's superiority and convert new populations to the Emperor's worship. Their victories became sermons delivered through bolter and blade, their conquests transformed into pilgrimages that brought entire worlds into the light of divine truth. The decades following Lorgar's reunion with the Emperor saw the word-bearers' Legion transform from efficient conquerors into something far more ambitious, crusaders whose mission extended beyond mere military compliance to the spiritual salvation of humanity itself. Under their Primarch's guidance, the 17th Legion developed a unique approach to the Great Crusade that prioritized lasting conversion over rapid conquest. Where other legions might secure a world submission through overwhelming force and move on to the next target, the word-bearers remained to ensure that their victories produced genuine faith rather than mere political acquiescence. This methodology, while thorough, created immediate friction with the broader imperial war machine. The Great Crusade operated on a scale that demanded constant momentum. Millions of worlds awaited liberation from alien oppression, heretical governance, or simple ignorance of humanity's manifest destiny. The Emperor's plan required his legions to maintain a pace of conquest that would unite the galaxy within a single lifetime. Yet the word-bearers' insistence on complete spiritual transformation of each conquered population inevitably slowed their advance to a fraction of their brother legion's speed. Lorgar remained unmoved by criticism from his fellow Primarchs or the increasingly pointed suggestions from Terra that the 17th Legion accelerate their operations. The Primarch understood that true unity required more than political submission. It demanded the kind of absolute faith that could only be achieved through careful cultivation and patient instruction. His warriors spent months or even years on worlds that other legions would have considered fully compliant after weeks of fighting, establishing schools where imperial doctrine could be taught, building temples where proper worship could be conducted, and training local populations in the rituals and observances that would maintain their devotion long after the word-bearers had departed. The results of this approach became evident across the Legion's operational sectors. Worlds brought into compliance by the word-bearers displayed levels of imperial loyalty that exceeded anything achieved through conventional conquest. Their populations embraced not just the emperor's political authority, but his divine nature, creating societies where heresy became literally unthinkable and rebellion against imperial rule was viewed as the gravest possible sin. These worlds contributed resources, recruits, and support to the Great Crusade with an enthusiasm that impressed even skeptical observers, demonstrating the practical benefits of the word-bearer's methods despite their apparent inefficiency. The construction of Monarchia represented the culmination of Lorgar's vision for what imperial compliance could achieve. Located on the world of Kur, which the word-bearers had brought into the Imperium during the early years of the Great Crusade, this city was conceived as a living testament to the power of faith properly channeled. Unlike the hastily erected administrative centers that typically marked imperial conquest, Monarchia was planned as a monument that would endure for millennia, its every stone and beam designed to inspire devotion in those who beheld it. The city's construction began with the careful selection of its location on Kur's primary continent, where ancient geological surveys had identified a site of particular significance. The chosen ground sat at the convergence of several major river systems, providing both practical advantages for trade and transportation and symbolic resonance with the flowing together of humanity's scattered tribes under the emperor's rule. The word-bearers Techmarines worked alongside local architects and artisans to create a design that would incorporate the finest elements of both imperial engineering and Kuran cultural traditions. Monarchia's central district rose around a massive cathedral whose spire reached nearly a kilometer into the sky, its golden apex visible from hundreds of kilometers away. The cathedral's interior could accommodate over 1 million worshippers simultaneously, its vast nave supported by columns carved from single blocks of marble quarried from Kur's northern mountains. Each column bore intricate reliefs depicting scenes from the emperor's life and the great victories of the Great Crusade, while the walls themselves were covered in frescoes that told the story of humanity's destiny among the stars. The city's residential quarters reflected the word-bearers' understanding that true faith required more than magnificent architecture. It demanded communities where devotion could flourish in daily life. Neighborhoods were organized around smaller temples and shrines, each serving as a focal point for local worship and instruction. Public spaces incorporated elements designed to remind citizens of their spiritual obligations, from fountains whose flowing water symbolized the emperor's grace to gardens where medicinal plants grew alongside flowers chosen for their religious significance. The planning of Monarchia extended beyond its physical structures to encompass the social and economic systems that would sustain its population. The word-bearers established schools where children learned imperial doctrine alongside practical skills, libraries where scholars could study approved texts and contribute to theological understanding, and workshops where artisans created objects of both utility and spiritual significance. The city's government operated according to principles derived from imperial law, but interpreted through the lens of religious devotion, with civic officials selected based on their demonstrated faith as much as their administrative competence. The construction process itself became a form of worship, with workers from across Kur volunteering their labor as an act of devotion to the emperor. The word-bearers organized these efforts with military precision, ensuring that the massive undertaking proceeded efficiently while maintaining the spiritual significance that made it more than mere construction. Veterans of the Legion worked alongside civilian volunteers, their presence serving both to provide technical expertise and to inspire greater dedication among the workers. As Monarchia neared completion, it began attracting visitors from across the sector and beyond. Imperial administrators came to study the city's innovative approaches to governance and social organization, while representatives from other worlds sought to understand how such remarkable levels of popular devotion had been achieved. The word-bearers welcomed these visitors, viewing them as opportunities to spread their methods to other worlds and demonstrate the superiority of faith-based compliance over purely secular approaches. The city's population swelled as Kur's citizens relocated to participate in what they viewed as a sacred community. Monarchia's districts filled with families who had sold their possessions elsewhere on the world to purchase homes in the perfect city, artisans who sought to practice their crafts in service of the emperor, and scholars who hoped to contribute to the great work of theological understanding. The word-bearers carefully managed this growth to ensure that the city's spiritual character remained intact even as its population expanded beyond original projections. The completion of Monarchia coincided with the 47th year of the Great Crusade, marking what Lorgar and his legion viewed as a triumph that validated their approach to imperial conquest. The city stood as proof that the emperor's vision could be realized not just through military might, but through the willing devotion of populations who truly understood their place in humanity's grand destiny. Delegations from across the Imperium arrived to witness the dedication ceremonies, where millions of citizens gathered to pledge their eternal loyalty to the master of mankind. The word-bearers' pride in their achievement was evident in every aspect of the dedication festivities. The Legion's chaplains delivered sermons that connected Monarchia's completion to the broader goals of the Great Crusade, while their warriors demonstrated combat techniques that emphasized the spiritual dimensions of warfare. The ceremonies included processions, where citizens carried banners depicting the emperor's divine attributes, musical performances that celebrated humanity's unity under his rule, and displays of art and architecture that showcased the creative potential unleashed by proper faith. Yet even as Monarchia reached its full glory, reports reaching Terra painted a troubling picture of the word-bearers' continued methodical approach to conquest. While their brother legions measured their achievements in systems conquered and worlds brought into compliance, the 17th Legion's progress remained frustratingly slow by Imperial standards. The Ultramarines had conquered 500 worlds in the time it took the word-bearers to properly convert 50, while the Imperial Fists and Iron Warriors had established fortress networks spanning entire sectors during the same period that Lorgar's sons spent perfecting the spiritual development of individual planets. The Emperor's growing frustration with his 17th Legion's pace became evident through increasingly direct communications from Terra. Where earlier messages had praised the word-bearers' thoroughness and the quality of their conquests, later dispatches emphasized the urgent need for acceleration and questioned whether the Legion's methods were compatible with the Great Crusade's strategic requirements. The master of mankind's patience, legendary though it was, had limits that even his beloved sons could not exceed indefinitely. The crisis came to a head when astropathic communications reached the word-bearers informing them that the Emperor himself was en route to Kur, accompanied by a substantial force of Ultramarines under the command of Robute Guilliman. The official purpose of this visit was described as an inspection of the 17th Legion's achievements and a strategic conference regarding their future operations, but the inclusion of another legion in the Emperor's retinue suggested more serious concerns than routine administrative review. Lorgar received this news while standing in Monarchia's great cathedral, surrounded by the artistic and architectural achievements that represented decades of careful work. The Primarch's superhuman intellect immediately grasped the implications of his father's approach, yet he struggled to understand how the Emperor could view the perfect city as anything other than vindication of the word-bearers' methods. Monarchia stood as living proof that faith could achieve what mere conquest could not, the willing and enthusiastic submission of entire populations to the imperial ideal. The word-bearers prepared for their father's arrival with characteristic thoroughness, organizing ceremonies and displays that would demonstrate both their military capabilities and their spiritual achievements. The Legion's warriors polished their armor to mirror brightness, their weapons maintained to perfect functionality, while the citizens of Monarchia prepared to welcome the Emperor with celebrations that would showcase their devotion. The city's streets were decorated with banners and flowers, its temples filled with offerings, and its population instructed in the proper protocols for greeting the master of mankind. The Emperor's arrival aboard his flagship, accompanied by the distinctive blue and gold vessels of the Ultramarines, created a spectacle that drew millions of observers to Monarchia's landing fields and observation platforms. The golden figure of the master of mankind descended from his transport surrounded by his custodian guard, his presence so overwhelming that even the word-bearers felt compelled to kneel in reverence. Behind him came Robute Gilliman and a substantial force of Ultramarines, their disciplined formations and efficient deployment a stark contrast to the religious pageantry that surrounded the emperor's reception. The emperor's inspection of Monarchia proceeded with methodical thoroughness, examining every aspect of the city's construction and organization. He walked through the great cathedral, studying the frescoes and reliefs that depicted his divine nature, visited the schools where children learned imperial doctrine through religious instruction, and observed the workshops where artisans created objects of spiritual significance. Throughout this inspection, his expression remained unreadable, giving no indication of his thoughts regarding what he observed. The destruction of Monarchia began without warning or explanation. The emperor simply issued orders to the Ultramarines, who responded with the mechanical efficiency that characterized all their operations. Demolition charges were placed with surgical precision throughout the city's key structures, while evacuation protocols ensured that the population could be removed before the destruction commenced. The word-bearers watched in stunned silence as their brothers in blue and gold systematically prepared to erase decades of careful work. The actual demolition took place over several hours, with the Ultramarines methodically reducing Monarchia's magnificent structures to rubble and ash. The great cathedral's spire, visible from hundreds of kilometers away, toppled with a crash that could be heard across the continent. The residential quarters where millions had lived in devotion to the emperor disappeared beneath clouds of dust and debris. The temples and shrines that had served as focal points for community worship were reduced to scattered stones and twisted metal. Throughout the destruction, the word-bearers and the population of Monarchia were forced to watch from designated observation areas, their movements controlled by ultramarine security details. The psychological impact of witnessing their greatest achievement's systematic erasure proved devastating for both the Legion and the civilians who had called the perfect city home. Many wept openly, while others stood in shocked silence, unable to comprehend how their devotion had been judged so harshly. The emperor's address to the assembled word-bearers following Monarchia's destruction delivered a condemnation that struck at the very foundations of their identity. The master of mankind rejected their interpretation of his nature, denouncing the religious devotion they had cultivated as a dangerous deviation from the imperial truth. The Great Crusade's purpose was to liberate humanity from superstition and ignorance, not to replace old gods with new ones. The word-bearers' methods, however well-intentioned, represented a fundamental misunderstanding of the Imperium's goals and values. The humiliation extended beyond mere verbal censure to encompass physical degradation that violated every principle of honor the Space Marines held sacred. The entire Legion was forced to kneel in the dust of their destroyed city, while the Emperor and his Ultramarines stood over them, the symbolism of their position unmistakable. For warriors who had conquered worlds and brought entire civilizations into compliance, this public demonstration of their failure represented a wound that would never fully heal. Lorgar's reaction to his father's condemnation revealed the depth of his shock and confusion. The primarch who had unified Calchas through the power of faith, who had led his legion in countless victories, who had created a perfect city as a testament to devotion, found himself declared not just wrong, but dangerously misguided. The Emperor's words struck at the core of everything Lorgar believed about his own nature and purpose, leaving him struggling to understand how his greatest achievements had become his most grievous failures. The aftermath of Monarchia's destruction saw the word-bearers' legion facing an uncertain future. Their methods had been publicly repudiated, their achievements literally reduced to rubble, and their understanding of their role in the Great Crusade fundamentally challenged. The Emperor's final words before departing Kur carried an ultimatum that would define the Legion's subsequent development. They must abandon their religious practices and embrace the imperial truth, or face consequences that would make the destruction of Monarchia seem merciful by comparison. The silence that followed the Emperor's departure from Kur hung over the word-bearers like a funeral shroud. The Legion that had once moved with purpose across the galaxy now found itself paralyzed by doubt and recrimination. Lorgar stood amid the ruins of Monarchia for days after the Ultramarines had withdrawn, his superhuman senses cataloging every fragment of broken stone, every twisted piece of metal that had once formed part of his perfect city. The Primarch's enhanced physiology required neither food nor rest, yet he remained motionless as a statue, his mind struggling to reconcile the Emperor's condemnation with everything he had believed about his father's divine nature. The Legion's warriors maintained their positions around the destruction site with characteristic discipline, but their usual confidence had evaporated. These Space Marines had conquered worlds in the Emperor's name, had seen entire populations kneel before their Gene Father's wisdom, had witnessed miracles that confirmed their faith in the Imperial cause. Now they stood guard over rubble that represented the complete rejection of everything they had accomplished. Veterans who had served since the Legion's earliest days found themselves questioning not just their methods, but their fundamental understanding of their purpose in the Great Crusade. Corferon approached his adopted son with the careful steps of a man walking through a minefield. The first captain had watched Lorgar's transformation from foundling to prophet to primarch, had guided the word-bearers through their evolution from imperial heralds to crusading evangelists, yet he had never seen his Gene Father in such a state of profound crisis. The older warrior's scarred features bore the weight of his own doubts, his mind already turning to possibilities that he dared not voice aloud. The ancient texts he had preserved from Calchas spoke of powers beyond the material realm, entities that might offer guidance when the Emperor's light seemed to have withdrawn. The first indication of Lorgar's emerging resolution came when he finally moved from his vigil among Monarchia's ruins. The Primarch's golden skin had taken on a pallor that his Gene sons had never seen before, while his eyes held a depth of pain that seemed to reflect the destruction surrounding him. When he spoke, his voice carried none of its usual commanding resonance, instead emerging as barely more than a whisper that somehow reached every word-bearer present. The Emperor had rejected their faith, had condemned their devotion as ignorance, had destroyed their greatest achievement without explanation or mercy. If the master of mankind was not the god they had believed him to be, then perhaps they had been worshipping the wrong deity entirely. The implications of this statement sent shockwaves through the assembled legion. These warriors had built their entire identity around the Emperor's divine nature, had conquered worlds in his name, had created a perfect city to honor his glory. To suggest that their father was not a god represented heresy of the highest order, yet none could deny the evidence of their own eyes. A true deity would not have destroyed such a magnificent testament to faith, would not have humiliated his most devoted followers, would not have rejected the sincere worship of those who loved him most. Erebus emerged from the ranks of the Legion's chaplains like a shadow given form. The Dark Apostle had served the word-bearers since their early days on Calchas, his understanding of theological matters rivaling even Corferon's vast knowledge. His pale features bore the ritual scarifications common among the planet's priest castes, while his eyes held the fervent gleam of one who had gazed deep into mysteries beyond mortal comprehension. Where other members of the Legion struggled with doubt and confusion, Erebus displayed a certainty that seemed almost supernatural in its intensity. The chaplain's words carried the weight of revelation as he spoke of ancient truths that predated the Emperor's rise to power. The entities that the Covenant had once worshipped as the primordial truth were not mere superstitions to be discarded in favor of imperial doctrine. They were powers of unimaginable magnitude that existed beyond the boundaries of real space, beings whose influence shaped the destiny of entire civilizations. The Emperor's rejection of their worship did not diminish their reality or their willingness to embrace those who sought true enlightenment. Erebus spoke of a pilgrimage that would take them beyond the boundaries of imperial space, into regions where the veil between reality and the immaterium grew thin. The Eye of Terror, that vast wound in the galaxy's northwestern reaches, contained worlds where the true nature of the universe could be observed without the distorting lens of imperial propaganda. There, among demon worlds where the laws of physics bent to the will of entities beyond mortal understanding, the word-bearers could discover the genuine divine powers that governed existence. The preparations for this secret journey required careful planning and absolute discretion. The word-bearers could not simply abandon their assigned sectors, without arousing suspicion from Terra or their brother legions. Instead, they would need to maintain the appearance of continuing their compliance operations while secretly redirecting their most trusted elements toward the Eye of Terror. The Legion's fleet would be divided, with some vessels remaining to conduct routine patrols and minor engagements, while others embarked on the pilgrimage that would determine their ultimate fate. Lorgar's selection of the pilgrimage's participants reflected both practical necessity and spiritual significance. The Primarch chose veterans whose loyalty to him personally exceeded their devotion to imperial doctrine, warriors who had witnessed the destruction of Monarchia and shared his growing doubts about the Emperor's true nature. These Space Marines represented the Legion's core identity, the brotherhood that had fought together across countless worlds and shared the vision of humanity's spiritual destiny. Their corruption would ensure that the entire Word-Bearer's Legion would eventually follow the same path. The vessels chosen for the pilgrimage underwent extensive modifications in hidden shipyards located in the outer reaches of systems under Word-Bearer control. Standard Imperial navigation equipment was supplemented with devices of uncertain origin, their designs based on fragmentary texts that Corferon had preserved from Calcas's pre-imperial period. These modifications would allow the ships to navigate the treacherous warp storms that surrounded the Eye of Terror, penetrating regions where conventional Imperial vessels would be torn apart by the raw forces of the Immaterium. The journey toward the Eye of Terror began during the 43rd year of the Great Crusade, as the Word-Bearer's selected vessels departed their assigned patrol routes under cover of routine fleet movements. The ships traveled through little-known warp routes that skirted the edges of Imperial space, their passages coordinated to avoid detection by astropathic monitoring stations or patrol fleets from other legions. The pilgrims maintained communication silence except for brief, coded transmissions that confirmed their continued progress toward their destination. As the fleet approached the Eye of Terror's outer boundaries, the effects of proximity to the Great Warp Storm became increasingly apparent. The ship's navigators reported strange readings on their instruments, while the Geller fields that protected the vessels from Immaterium incursion began showing signs of stress. The very fabric of reality seemed to fluctuate around them, with corridors occasionally stretching longer than their blueprints indicated, and shadows moving independently of their sources. The Word-Bearers aboard these vessels experienced vivid dreams filled with imagery that seemed to originate from sources beyond their own memories. The first demon world they encountered existed in a state of constant flux that defied rational description. The planet's surface shifted between different configurations as competing warp entities imposed their will upon its malleable reality. Forests of crystalline trees that sang with voices of the damned gave way to seas of liquid fire that burned without consuming, while cities built from living bone rose and fell according to the whims of their supernatural architects. The Word-Bearers who made planetfall found themselves in an environment where the normal laws of physics held no sway and the boundary between thought and reality had completely dissolved. The demon entities that inhabited this realm appeared to the Word-Bearers in forms that both terrified and fascinated the Space Marines. These beings possessed knowledge that spanned millennia, their consciousness encompassing truths about the universe's fundamental nature that Imperial doctrine had deliberately concealed. They spoke of the Emperor not as a benevolent father figure, but as a tyrant who sought to deny humanity its rightful inheritance of psychic evolution. The master of mankind's crusade against religion was revealed as an attempt to weaken the warp entities by starving them of the worship that sustained their power. The revelations delivered by these demon entities struck at the core of everything the Word-Bearers had believed about their place in the galaxy. The Emperor's imperial truth was exposed as a lie designed to prevent humanity from achieving its full potential, while his rejection of religious worship was shown to be motivated by fear rather than wisdom. The entities of the warp offered partnership rather than domination, promising to share their knowledge with those brave enough to embrace the reality of their existence. Erebus served as the primary interpreter of these revelations, his theological training allowing him to understand the complex metaphysical concepts that the demon entities communicated. The chaplain's role evolved from mere translator to active facilitator, helping to establish the protocols through which the word-bearers could safely interact with beings whose very existence challenged conventional understanding. His guidance proved essential in preventing the Space Marines from being overwhelmed by the sheer alienness of their supernatural contacts. The gradual corruption of the word-bearers proceeded through carefully orchestrated stages that respected both the Space Marines' enhanced physiology and their ingrained loyalty to their primarch. The demon entities understood that these warriors could not be simply commanded to abandon their previous beliefs, but must instead be led to discover the truth for themselves through direct experience and logical reasoning. The corruption took the form of enlightenment rather than domination, with each revelation building upon previous understanding to create a comprehensive worldview that incorporated both imperial achievements and warp-based spirituality. Lorgar's personal transformation during this period reflected the profound nature of the revelations he encountered. The Primarch, who had once preached absolute devotion to the Emperor, now found himself questioning every aspect of his previous faith. The demon entities showed him visions of the galaxy's true history, revealing the ancient civilizations that had flourished through cooperation with warp-based powers and the catastrophes that had resulted from attempts to deny the Immaterium's influence. These visions demonstrated that the Emperor's path led not to humanity's salvation, but to its eventual stagnation and decline. The four gods of chaos revealed themselves gradually to the word-bearers, each entity demonstrating different aspects of the power that could be achieved through proper worship and dedication. Khorne offered the strength to overcome any enemy through righteous fury and martial excellence. Tzeentch promised knowledge that could unlock the secrets of the universe and guide humanity toward its ultimate destiny. Nurgle demonstrated the peace that came from accepting the natural cycles of decay and renewal. Slaanesh showed the heights of sensation and experience that awaited those who embraced their full potential. The word-bearers' acceptance of these new patron deities proceeded through a process of theological synthesis that incorporated elements of their previous imperial faith. The Emperor was not rejected entirely, but rather recontextualized as a powerful but limited being who had chosen to deny humanity's true spiritual heritage. The Chaos Gods were revealed as the genuine divine powers that had shaped the galaxy since its creation, entities whose worship would elevate humanity to heights that the Emperor's sterile rationalism could never achieve. The rituals through which the word-bearers formalized their new allegiances drew upon both Kalkian traditions and the demon entities' direct instruction. These ceremonies took place in locations where the boundary between real space and the warp had grown thin, allowing for direct communication with the Chaos Gods themselves. The participating Space Marines underwent physical and spiritual transformations that enhanced their already formidable capabilities, while marking them as servants of powers beyond imperial comprehension. The knowledge gained during the pilgrimage extended far beyond theological revelation to encompass practical techniques for wielding warp-based power. The word-bearers learned to channel the energies of the Immaterium through focused ritual and meditation, gaining abilities that surpassed even their enhanced Space Marine physiology. Veterans who had served the Legion for decades discovered that they could heal wounds through prayer to Nurgle, enhance their combat effectiveness through devotion to Khorne, or gain prophetic insights through communion with Tzeentch. The return journey from the Eye of Terror required even greater secrecy than the original pilgrimage, as the word-bearers now carried knowledge that would be considered the highest form of heresy by imperial authorities. The corrupted Space Marines had learned to conceal their transformation behind facades of continued loyalty, their enhanced understanding of human psychology allowing them to manipulate their uncorrupted brothers without arousing suspicion. The techniques they had learned from the demon entities proved invaluable in maintaining operational security while gradually expanding their influence throughout the Legion. The integration of the Pilgrims back into the main body of the Word-Bearers Legion proceeded through carefully planned stages that ensured the corruption would spread without triggering defensive reactions from loyalist elements. The returned veterans shared their revelations selectively, targeting Space Marines whose personal experiences had already created doubts about Imperial doctrine. The destruction of Monarchia had left many word-bearers questioning their faith in the emperor, creating fertile ground for the seeds of heresy that the pilgrims now planted. The transformation of the word-bearers following their pilgrimage to the Eye of Terror created ripple effects that extended far beyond the confines of a single legion. The knowledge they had gained from their communion with the chaos gods provided them with tools of corruption that could penetrate even the most loyal imperial institutions. Chief among these weapons was the Lodge system, a network of secret societies that would spread like a virus through the legions Astartes, undermining the very foundations of the Emperor's grand design. The concept of warrior lodges was not entirely foreign to Space Marine culture. Many legions had maintained informal brotherhoods that served social and ceremonial functions, providing venues for veterans to share experiences and newer recruits to learn from their elders. These organizations typically operated with the tacit approval of Legion command structures, their activities viewed as beneficial to morale and unit cohesion. The word-bearer's innovation lay not in creating something entirely new, but in weaponizing existing traditions for purposes of systematic subversion. Erebus took personal responsibility for developing the Lodge system's operational framework, drawing upon his extensive knowledge of human psychology and organizational dynamics. The Dark Apostle understood that successful infiltration required patience and subtlety rather than dramatic gestures that might alert potential targets to the corruption spreading among them. The lodges would begin as seemingly innocent gatherings focused on brotherhood and shared experiences, gradually evolving into vehicles for spreading doubt about imperial doctrine and loyalty to the emperor. The initial implementation of the lodge system targeted legions whose cultural traditions made them particularly susceptible to such infiltration. The Luna Wolves, with their emphasis on personal bonds between warriors and their charismatic leadership under Horus, presented an ideal testing ground for the word-bearer's subversive techniques. The Sons of Horus, as they had recently been renamed in honor of their primarch's achievements, maintained a culture that valued individual initiative and personal loyalty over rigid adherence to imperial protocol. The establishment of the first lodge within the Sons of Horus required careful preparation and the identification of suitable candidates for initial recruitment. The word-bearers selected veterans whose combat records demonstrated exceptional courage and whose personal histories suggested potential dissatisfaction with certain aspects of imperial policy. These Space Marines were approached through seemingly casual conversations that gradually revealed shared concerns about the direction of the Great Crusade and the increasing distance between the Emperor and his gene-forged sons. The lodge meetings themselves took place in locations carefully chosen to avoid detection by Legion command structures or Imperial observers. Abandoned sections of starships provided ideal venues, their isolated chambers offering privacy, while their proximity to the Legion's daily operations allowed participants to attend without arousing suspicion. The meetings began with traditional elements familiar to Space Marine culture, the sharing of combat experiences, discussions of tactical innovations, and ceremonial recognition of fallen brothers. The corruption introduced through these gatherings proceeded through stages so gradual that participants rarely recognized the transformation occurring within their own minds. Initial discussions focused on legitimate concerns about imperial policy and the conduct of the Great Crusade, topics that any thoughtful Space Marine might reasonably question. The Lodge brothers explored the apparent contradictions between the Emperor's stated goals and his actual policies, examining instances where imperial actions seemed to conflict with proclaimed ideals. The word-bearers' representatives within these lodges served as skilled facilitators rather than obvious propagandists, guiding discussions toward predetermined conclusions while allowing participants to believe they were reaching these insights independently. The techniques they employed drew upon both their enhanced understanding of human psychology and the supernatural insights gained through their communion with the chaos gods. Lodge members found themselves articulating doubts they had never consciously acknowledged, expressing concerns that seemed to emerge from their own deep reflection rather than external manipulation. The expansion of the lodge system beyond the Sons of Horus required adaptation to the unique cultures and traditions of different legions. The Iron Warriors' pragmatic approach to warfare made them receptive to arguments about the inefficiency of imperial bureaucracy and the strategic limitations imposed by Terra's micromanagement. The Night Lord's brutal methods of compliance created natural friction with imperial ideals that could be exploited to foster resentment against the Emperor's moral constraints. The Alpha Legion presented both the greatest opportunity and the most significant challenge for Lodge infiltration. Their culture of secrecy and compartmentalized operations made it difficult to identify suitable recruitment targets, yet their existing networks could potentially accelerate the corruption spread once properly infiltrated. The Word-Bearers' approach to the 20th Legion required exceptional subtlety, with recruitment efforts proceeding through multiple layers of misdirection and false identities. The World Eater's descent into bloodthirsty madness under the influence of the Butcher's nails made them poor candidates for the sophisticated psychological manipulation that characterized most Lodge operations. However, their Primarch Angron's bitter resentment toward the Emperor created opportunities for more direct approaches. The Word-Bearers found that appeals to the Red Angel's sense of injustice and betrayal could bypass the need for subtle corruption, though such direct methods carried greater risks of exposure. The Lodge system's most significant success came with its penetration of the Imperial Fists and their successor chapters. Rogel Dorn's Legion prided itself on absolute loyalty and unwavering dedication to Imperial ideals, making them seemingly immune to corruption. However, the Word-Bearers discovered that this very perfectionism created internal pressures that could be exploited. Lodge discussions focused on the impossible standards expected of Space Marines and the psychological toll of maintaining absolute loyalty in an increasingly complex galaxy. The Death Guard's stoic acceptance of hardship and their Primarch Mortarian's deep-seated hatred of Psychers created unique opportunities for corruption. The Lodge meetings within the 14th Legion explored themes of endurance and acceptance, gradually introducing concepts related to the natural cycles of decay and renewal that would later facilitate their fall to Nurgle's influence. The Word-Bearers' representatives emphasized the futility of fighting against inevitable change, preparing the ground for future corruption. The Emperor's children presented a different challenge entirely, their pursuit of perfection and aesthetic excellence making them susceptible to certain forms of corruption while resistant to others. The lodges established within the Third Legion focused on the limitations imposed by imperial doctrine on personal achievement and artistic expression. Discussions explored the possibility that true perfection might require transcending the moral constraints that the Emperor had imposed upon his sons. The infiltration of the Thousand Sons required exceptional care due to their extensive psychic abilities and their Primarch Magnus's deep understanding of the warp's nature. The Word-Bearers' approach emphasized the persecution that Psychers faced under imperial doctrine and the hypocrisy of an emperor who wielded immense psychic power while condemning others for similar abilities. The Lodge discussions within the 15th Legion explored themes of knowledge and enlightenment that would later facilitate their corruption by Tzeentch. The operational security surrounding the Lodge system required constant vigilance and sophisticated counterintelligence measures. The Word-Bearers established multiple layers of protection around their subversive activities, including false identities for their agents, compartmentalized communication networks, and elaborate cover stories that would withstand casual investigation. The lodges themselves were structured to limit the damage that could result from the discovery of any individual cell. The intelligence gathered through the lodge system provided the Word-Bearers with unprecedented insight into the strengths and weaknesses of their brother legions. Lodge members unknowingly shared information about their unit's operational capabilities, command structures, and internal dynamics that would prove invaluable during the coming civil war. This intelligence network allowed the Word-Bearers to identify potential allies and enemies while developing strategies tailored to each legion's specific characteristics. The The psychological profiles developed through lodge interactions enabled the word-bearers to predict how different primarchs and their legions would respond to various crisis scenarios. This knowledge proved essential in planning the events that would eventually trigger the Horus heresy, allowing the conspirators to manipulate circumstances with surgical precision. The lodge system had transformed from a tool of corruption into a comprehensive intelligence apparatus that penetrated the highest levels of imperial military command. The corruption of Horus himself required a more direct approach than the gradual subversion employed against his legion. The War Master's position as the Emperor's chosen successor and his central role in the Great Crusade made him too important to risk with subtle manipulation that might fail at a crucial moment. Instead, the word-bearers orchestrated a series of events that would create the perfect opportunity for Horus's fall, using the lodge system to ensure that the necessary elements would be in place when the moment arrived. The selection of Davin as the site for Horus's corruption reflected careful planning that had begun years before the actual events unfolded. The world's primitive human population worshipped entities that the word-bearers recognized as aspects of the Chaos Gods, though the locals lacked the theological sophistication to understand the true nature of their patrons. The planet's warp-touched environment created ideal conditions for the kind of supernatural intervention that would be required to corrupt a being as powerful as a primarch. The anatheme blade that would wound Horus represented one of the word-bearers' most significant achievements in combining ancient knowledge with practical application. The weapon had been recovered from a demon world during their pilgrimage to the Eye of Terror, its construction incorporating materials and techniques that existed at the intersection of technology and sorcery. The blade's ability to inflict wounds that resisted normal healing made it the perfect tool for creating the crisis that would make Horus vulnerable to corruption. Erebus's presence on Davin during the crucial events was no coincidence, but rather the culmination of months of careful positioning and preparation. The Dark Apostle had cultivated relationships with key members of the Sons of Horus command structure through the lodge system, ensuring that he would be present when the opportunity for corruption arose. His role as a trusted advisor and spiritual counselor provided him with the access necessary to guide events toward their predetermined conclusion. The ritual that transported the dying Horus into the warp required precise timing and extensive preparation that had been conducted in secret over many months. The word-bearers had established hidden shrines on Davin that served as focal points for channeling warp energy, while their agents within the Sons of Horus ensured that the necessary participants would be present when the ceremony began. The Lodge brothers who participated in the ritual believed they were attempting to save their primarch's life, unaware that they were actually facilitating his damnation. The visions experienced by Horus during his sojourn in the warp were carefully crafted to exploit his specific psychological vulnerabilities and personal concerns. The Chaos Gods revealed to him a future where the Emperor abandoned his Space Marine sons in favor of mortal administrators, where the Primarchs were discarded once their military usefulness had ended. These visions played upon Horus's pride and his deep-seated fears about his relationship with his father, transforming loyalty into resentment through the revelation of apparent betrayal. The transformation of Horus from loyal son to arch-traitor required more than simple corruption. It demanded a complete restructuring of his worldview and priorities. The Chaos Gods offered him not merely power but purpose, revealing that the Emperor's plan for humanity was fundamentally flawed and that only through their guidance could the species achieve its true potential. The War Master's acceptance of this new paradigm marked the point of no return, transforming the Great Crusade's greatest champion into its most dangerous enemy. The immediate aftermath of Horus's corruption saw the word-bearers moving quickly to consolidate their gains and prepare for the larger conflict that would inevitably follow. The lodge system that had taken years to establish suddenly shifted from a tool of subversion to an instrument of open rebellion, with lodge brothers throughout the legions Astartes receiving coded messages that activated long-dormant contingency plans. The careful preparation that had preceded this moment now paid dividends as the conspiracy moved from the shadows into open action. The establishment of chaos cults throughout the Imperium had proceeded parallel to the corruption of the Space Marine legions, creating a network of mortal supporters who could provide intelligence, resources, and operational support for the coming rebellion. These cults had been carefully seeded on worlds across Imperial space, their members recruited from populations that had grievances against Imperial rule or possessed psychological profiles that made them susceptible to chaos corruption. The mortal agents scattered across Imperial space received their activation codes through dreams that burned themselves into their consciousness with supernatural clarity. Across hundreds of worlds, cult cells that had remained dormant for years suddenly erupted into coordinated action, their members driven by visions of the galaxy's transformation under the guidance of the true gods. These simultaneous uprisings created chaos throughout Imperial communication networks, disrupting the flow of information that might have warned loyal forces of the greater catastrophe about to unfold. The Word-Bearers' preparations for their assault on Calth had begun decades before Horus's corruption, rooted in Lorgar's bitter resentment toward the Ultramarines and their primarch Robute Guilliman. The 13th Legion's role in the destruction of Monarchia had created a wound in Lorgar's psyche that festered with each passing year, transforming from mere disappointment into consuming hatred. The Ultramarines represented everything that the Word-Bearers had been condemned for abandoning: secular efficiency, rapid conquest, and absolute loyalty to the Emperor's stated vision rather than his divine nature. Guilliman's public criticism of the Word-Bearers' methods had compounded the insult of Monarchia's destruction. The Lord of Ultramar had written extensively about the need for standardized compliance procedures and the dangers of allowing religious sentiment to interfere with military objectives. His theoretical works, widely distributed among Legion command structures, contained thinly veiled criticisms of the 17th Legion's approach that Lorgar interpreted as personal attacks on his competence and judgment. The selection of Calth as the target for the Word-Bearers' opening strike reflected both strategic calculation and symbolic significance. The world served as one of Ultramar's primary naval bases, its orbital shipyards producing the vessels that maintained the 13th Legion's far-flung operations. The destruction of Calth's infrastructure would cripple Guilliman's ability to respond to threats throughout his realm, while simultaneously demonstrating the futility of relying on purely material power rather than spiritual strength. The planet's population of nearly 12 billion souls provided the Word-Bearers with an opportunity to conduct rituals on a scale that had never before been attempted. The mass sacrifice of an entire world's inhabitants would generate warp energies sufficient to tear permanent rifts in reality, creating gateways through which demon legions could pour into real space. The symbolic value of corrupting one of Ultramar's crown jewels would send a message that resonated throughout the galaxy. No world was beyond the reach of the true god's influence. The deception that brought the Word-Bearers to Calth required months of careful preparation and the manipulation of imperial bureaucratic procedures. Lorgar's forces presented themselves as responding to intelligence reports suggesting Orc activity in the Viridian system, requesting permission to conduct joint operations with the Ultramarines against this supposed threat. The fabricated evidence supporting this request included doctored astropathic communications, falsified sensor readings, and testimony from corrupted Imperial officials who had been compromised through the cult networks. The Ultramarines' response to the Word-Bearers' request demonstrated the very efficiency that Lorgar had come to despise. Guilliman's staff processed the intelligence reports with mechanical precision, cross-referencing the data against their own surveillance networks and developing comprehensive operational plans within days of receiving the initial communication. The Lord of Ultramar himself approved the joint operation, viewing it as an opportunity to demonstrate proper coordination between Legion forces while addressing a potential threat to Ultramar's security. The Word-Bearers' fleet that translated into the Calth system comprised over 200 vessels, their hulls bearing the crimson and gold livery that had once symbolized devotion to the Emperor but now concealed allegiance to darker powers. The ship's external appearance remained unchanged from their pre-corruption configuration, their weapon systems and defensive capabilities matching Imperial specifications exactly. Hidden within their holds, however, lay equipment and personnel that no loyal Imperial force would ever carry: demon-possessed war machines, cultist auxiliaries trained in forbidden rituals, and weapons forged in the fires of demon worlds. The orbital defense platforms that protected Calth represented some of the finest military engineering in the Imperium, their massive weapon batteries capable of engaging entire fleets simultaneously. The Ultramarines had constructed these fortifications according to theoretical principles developed by Guilliman himself, incorporating overlapping fields of fire and redundant command structures that should have made them virtually impregnable. The Word-Bearer's ability to bypass these defenses entirely demonstrated the superiority of supernatural insight over purely rational planning. Erebus had spent months infiltrating Calth's command structure through a combination of psychic manipulation and carefully placed agents. The Dark Apostle's enhanced abilities allowed him to implant suggestions in the minds of key personnel, gradually adjusting their decision-making processes to favor actions that would benefit the coming assault. Defense grid operators found themselves scheduling maintenance cycles that would leave critical sectors temporarily vulnerable, while communications officers developed routing protocols that would delay the transmission of emergency signals. The corruption of Calth's automated systems proceeded through techniques that combined advanced technical knowledge with warp-based manipulation. Word-Bearer's Techmarines, their mechanical expertise enhanced by demon-granted insights, introduced subtle modifications to the planet's infrastructure that would activate when specific trigger codes were transmitted. These changes affected everything from power distribution networks to atmospheric processors, creating vulnerabilities that could be exploited to maximize the assault's psychological impact. The moment of betrayal came during what the Ultramarines believed to be a routine fleet review, with representatives from both legions gathered aboard orbital stations to coordinate their supposed joint operation against Orc forces. The Word-Bearer's opening salvo targeted not enemy positions, but their erstwhile allies, catching the 13th Legion completely unprepared for treachery from their own cousins. Lance batteries that should have been aimed at empty space instead carved through ultramarine vessels at point-blank range, their energy beams penetrating shields that had been lowered in a gesture of trust. The furious Abyss and her sister ships revealed their true nature as the assault commenced, their modified weapon systems unleashing destruction that exceeded anything in the standard Imperial arsenal. These vessels had been secretly reconstructed in hidden shipyards throughout Word-Bearer territory, their hulls reinforced with materials that existed at the boundary between technology and sorcery. The ship's crews included demon-possessed servitors whose inhuman efficiency allowed them to operate weapon systems that would have overwhelmed normal human operators. Captain Ventanus of the Ultramarines' 4th Company found himself commanding the defense of Calth's northern continent when the orbital bombardment began. The veteran officer had served in dozens of compliance actions across Ultramar, his tactical expertise honed through years of fighting against alien threats and rebellious human populations. Nothing in his experience had prepared him for the systematic destruction that now rained down from the heavens. As weapons that should have been defending, Calth instead turned their fury against the world they were meant to protect. The bombardment pattern revealed the Word-Bearer's true objectives with horrifying clarity. Rather than targeting military installations or strategic infrastructure, the incoming fire focused on population centers and religious sites. Schools where children learned Imperial doctrine burned alongside cathedrals where citizens had gathered to pray for the Emperor's protection. The pattern of destruction followed geometric designs that served no apparent tactical purpose, but held deep significance for those versed in demonic lore. The warp storms that erupted across Calth's surface as the bombardment continued defied all natural explanation. These tears in reality appeared wherever the Word-Bearer's weapons had struck with particular intensity, their swirling energies creating gateways through which entities from the Immaterium could enter real space. The demons that poured through these rifts bore forms that violated every principle of biology and physics, their very presence causing reality to warp and buckle around them. The civilian population's reaction to the assault revealed the limitations of imperial doctrine in preparing ordinary humans for supernatural threats. Citizens who had been trained to respond to conventional attacks, seeking shelter in reinforced bunkers, following evacuation procedures, maintaining communication with emergency services, found themselves facing enemies that existed beyond the scope of their understanding. The demons that stalked through Calth's burning cities could not be fought with conventional weapons or deterred by physical barriers. The Ultramarines' response to the betrayal demonstrated both their tactical excellence and the inadequacy of purely military solutions to supernatural problems. Companies that had been scattered across the planet for routine garrison duties attempted to coordinate their defense through established communication protocols, only to discover that their Vox networks had been compromised by word-bearer infiltrators. Orders issued by company commanders never reached their intended recipients, while false communications directed loyal forces into carefully prepared ambushes. The ritual circles that appeared throughout Calth's major cities had been prepared years in advance by word-bearer agents operating under deep cover identities. These geometric patterns, carved into the bedrock beneath important structures, served as focal points for channeling the psychic energy released by mass death and suffering. The circles remained invisible to normal human perception until activated by the appropriate incantations, at which point they blazed with eldritch fire that could be seen from orbit. Cor Ferron's personal involvement in the assault reflected the operation's importance to the word-bearer's long-term strategy. The first captain had argued for a more subtle approach that would avoid direct confrontation with the Ultramarines' main force, but Lorgar's desire for spectacular vengeance had overruled such considerations. The old priest-warrior now found himself commanding ground forces in urban combat that bore no resemblance to the theological debates that had shaped his early relationship with his Gene's son. The demon engines that accompanied the word-bearer's ground assault represented the fusion of mechanicum technology with warp-spawned malevolence. These war machines had been constructed in hidden forges, where tech adepts corrupted by chaos worked alongside demon smiths to create weapons that transcended the boundaries between the material and immaterial realms. The engine's crews consisted of volunteers who had undergone surgical procedures to bond their nervous systems directly with demon entities, creating hybrid beings that possessed both human tactical knowledge and supernatural perception. The Shadow Crusade's expansion beyond Calth required coordination with other traitor forces that shared the word-bearer's commitment to the galaxy's spiritual transformation. The World Eater's Legion, under the increasingly unstable leadership of Angron, provided the raw aggression necessary to overwhelm loyalist defenses through sheer brutality. The alliance between the 12th and 17th Legions created a devastating combination of religious fanaticism and berserker fury that proved nearly unstoppable in conventional combat. Angron's personal participation in the Shadow Crusade reflected his own bitter resentment toward the Emperor and the Imperium that had enslaved him. The Red Angel's hatred burned with such intensity that it created a resonance with Khorne's realm, gradually transforming the Primarch into something more demon than human. The World Eaters who followed their Gene Father into battle found their own capacity for violence enhanced by proximity to his supernatural rage, their butcher's nails singing in harmony with the Blood God's eternal fury. The tactical coordination between the Word-Bearers and World Eaters required careful management of their fundamentally different approaches to warfare. Where Lorgar's sons fought with methodical precision guided by religious conviction, Angron's warriors sought only the ecstasy of close combat and the glory of honorable death. The Word-Bearers' chaplains learned to channel their allies' bloodlust toward objectives that served the broader strategic goals of corrupting entire star systems rather than simply killing their inhabitants. The progression of the Shadow Crusade through Ultramar followed a pattern that combined military conquest with systematic spiritual corruption. Each world that fell to the combined traitor forces became a laboratory for testing new techniques of mass conversion and demon summoning. The word-bearers documented the results of their experiments with scientific precision, building a comprehensive understanding of how different populations responded to various forms of supernatural influence. The corruption techniques employed during the Shadow Crusade evolved rapidly as the word-bearers gained experience with large-scale operations. Initial attempts at mass conversion relied heavily on traditional preaching and theological argument, but these methods proved inadequate when dealing with populations that had been thoroughly indoctrinated with imperial beliefs. The chaplains learned to combine their oratory with psychic manipulation and demon-enhanced charisma, creating presentations that bypassed rational thought entirely and spoke directly to their audience's subconscious fears and desires. The establishment of chaos cults on conquered worlds required infrastructure that could support ongoing operations while remaining hidden from potential imperial reclamation efforts. The word-bearers constructed underground temple complexes that served as both worship centers and military command posts, their chambers carved according to geometric principles that enhanced the flow of warp energy. These facilities included libraries where forbidden knowledge could be preserved, workshops where demon weapons could be manufactured, and breeding pits where new generations of cultists could be raised in proper devotion to the true gods. The recruitment of local populations into chaos service proceeded through techniques that exploited the specific cultural characteristics of each conquered world. Agricultural planets responded well to appeals based on Nurgle's dominion over natural cycles, while hive worlds proved susceptible to Slaanesh's promises of sensory transcendence. Industrial centers could be corrupted through Khorne's emphasis on strength and domination, while scholarly communities fell to Tzeentch's offers of forbidden knowledge and intellectual advancement. The transformation of the word-bearers from loyal servants of the Emperor into devoted champions of chaos required more than theological revelation. It demanded a complete restructuring of their organizational framework to accommodate their new spiritual mission. The traditional imperial command structure, with its emphasis on secular authority and tactical efficiency, proved inadequate for a legion whose primary purpose had shifted from conquest to conversion. The word-bearers needed leaders who could serve simultaneously as military commanders and spiritual guides, warriors capable of wielding both bolter and blessed tome with equal skill. The emergence of the Dark Apostle as the Legion's primary leadership caste represented the culmination of decades of theological evolution that had begun even before their pilgrimage to the Eye of Terror. These warrior priests combined the martial prowess expected of Space Marine officers with the spiritual authority necessary to guide their brothers through the complexities of chaos worship. Unlike the chaplains of other legions, who served primarily as morale officers and keepers of tradition, the Dark Apostles functioned as direct conduits between the material realm and the powers of the warp, their authority derived not from rank or seniority, but from demonstrated communion with the chaos gods themselves. The selection process for Dark Apostles required candidates to undergo trials that tested both their military capabilities and their spiritual devotion. Prospective leaders faced challenges that pushed their enhanced physiology to its limits, while simultaneously demanding absolute faith in the face of supernatural phenomena that would have driven lesser beings to madness. These trials took place in locations where the boundary between real space and the immaterium had grown thin, exposing candidates to the raw power of chaos, while evaluating their ability to channel that energy constructively rather than being consumed by it. The ritual scarification that marked a Dark Apostle's elevation to his new rank served both ceremonial and practical purposes. The geometric patterns carved into their flesh-followed designs that had been revealed through communion with demon entities, each line and curve serving as a conduit for warp energy that enhanced the bearer's psychic abilities. The scarification process itself required the candidate to remain conscious and recite lengthy passages from the Book of Lorgar, while demon-forged blades inscribed the sacred geometries into their skin, the pain serving as both test and offering to the dark gods. The Dark Apostles' authority extended beyond traditional military command to encompass spiritual guidance for their subordinates and the populations under their control. These leaders served as interpreters of divine will, translating the often contradictory impulses of the chaos gods into practical doctrine that could guide daily decision-making. Their enhanced understanding of warp phenomena allowed them to recognize signs and portents that remained invisible to normal human perception, while their theological training enabled them to distinguish between genuine divine guidance and the random fluctuations of the immaterium. The establishment of the Apostolic Council as the Word-bearer's supreme governing body reflected the Legion's transformation from a traditional military organization into a theocratic hierarchy. This assembly of the most senior Dark Apostles served as both strategic planning committee and theological seminary, their deliberations encompassing everything from major military campaigns to minute points of doctrinal interpretation. The council's meetings took place in chambers specifically designed to facilitate communion with the chaos gods, their walls inscribed with protective wards that prevented unauthorized entities from influencing the proceedings. The integration of sorcery into the Word-bearer's military doctrine required extensive modification of standard Space Marine tactical procedures. The Legion's librarians, once constrained by imperial restrictions on psychic activity, found themselves elevated to positions of unprecedented importance as their abilities proved essential for coordinating demon summoning and maintaining communication with warp entities. These psychers underwent additional training that taught them to channel the specific energies associated with each chaos god, allowing them to tailor their abilities to support different tactical objectives. The development of demon summoning as a standard military capability transformed the Word-bearer's approach to warfare in fundamental ways. Traditional imperial tactics assumed that battles would be fought between material forces operating according to predictable physical laws, but the Legion's new capabilities allowed them to introduce supernatural elements that could shift the balance of any engagement. The summoning rituals required careful coordination between multiple Dark Apostles and their supporting psychers, their combined efforts creating stable gateways through which demon entities could enter real space. The binding protocols that governed demon summoning reflected lessons learned through costly trial and error during the Legion's early experiments with warp entities. The Dark Apostles discovered that uncontrolled summoning often resulted in demons that proved more dangerous to their summoners than to their intended targets, as the entity's alien psychology made them unreliable allies at best. The development of proper binding techniques required extensive study of demonic nature and the creation of ritual frameworks that could compel supernatural entities to serve specific purposes while preventing them from acting on their own destructive impulses. The classification system that the Word-bearers developed for different types of demon entities reflected their systematic approach to understanding and utilizing supernatural forces. Lesser demons were categorized according to their primary capabilities and the specific rituals required for their summoning, while greater entities required more complex negotiations that often involved significant sacrifices or the completion of specific tasks. The Legion's archives contain detailed records of successful summoning attempts, including the precise conditions that had enabled each ritual and the behavioral patterns displayed by the resulting demon allies. Erebus emerged as the most influential figure within the transformed Legion hierarchy, his position as first chaplain evolving into something approaching that of a secondary primarch. The Dark Apostle's role in orchestrating Horus's corruption and his extensive knowledge of chaos theology made him indispensable to Lorgar's vision for the Legion's future. Erebus commanded respect not only for his military achievements, but for his ability to interpret the often cryptic communications received from the Chaos Gods, translating divine will into actionable intelligence that could guide the Legion's strategic planning. The expansion of Erebus's authority beyond traditional chaplain duties created tensions within the Legion's command structure that required careful management. Veteran officers who had served since the Legion's founding found themselves subordinated to a warrior whose primary qualifications were theological rather than military, while newer recruits from Colchis viewed the first chaplain as their most direct connection to the spiritual traditions that had shaped their homeworld. Erebus navigated these competing loyalties through a combination of demonstrated competence and careful attention to the concerns of different factions within the Legion. The establishment of the Coryphaeus rank as an intermediate level between Dark Apostles and standard company commanders reflected the word-bearer's need for officers who could coordinate the complex rituals that had become integral to their military operations. These warriors served as assistants to the Dark Apostles, their training encompassing both tactical leadership and basic theological instruction. The Coryphaeus rank provided a pathway for promising officers to advance toward full Dark Apostle status, while ensuring that every major military unit included personnel capable of conducting essential religious observances. The integration of chaos cultists into the Legion's organizational structure required the development of new command protocols that could accommodate the significant differences between Space Marine and mortal capabilities. The word-bearers established auxiliary formations that combined cultist infantry with Space Marine leadership, creating hybrid units that could operate effectively in environments where standard Astartes tactics proved inadequate. These formations proved particularly valuable during urban warfare and occupation duties, where their intimate knowledge of local conditions provided significant advantages over conventional Imperial forces. The training programs developed for cultist auxiliaries emphasized religious indoctrination alongside basic military instruction, ensuring that mortal followers understood their role in the Legion's greater spiritual mission. The most promising cultists received advanced training that prepared them for specialized roles such as ritual assistants, intelligence operatives, or technical specialists. The word-bearers discovered that mortals who had undergone proper chaos indoctrination often displayed enhanced capabilities that approached those of baseline Space Marines, their devotion to the Dark Gods granting them strength and resilience beyond normal human limits. The development of demon weapons as standard equipment for Dark Apostles required the establishment of forged shrines, where mortal artificers worked alongside demon entities to create armaments that transcended the boundaries between technology and sorcery. These weapons incorporated materials that existed partially in the warp, their construction requiring rituals that bound demon essence into physical form. The resulting armaments possessed capabilities that exceeded anything in the standard Imperial arsenal, their effectiveness enhanced by the spiritual connection between weapon and wielder. The maintenance requirements for demon weapons created new logistical challenges that the word-bearers addressed through the development of specialized support personnel. These weapon keepers underwent training that combined traditional tech marine instruction with theological education, their duties encompassing both mechanical maintenance and the spiritual observances necessary to keep demon weapons functioning properly. The weapons required regular offerings of blood and prayer to maintain their supernatural properties, while major repairs often necessitated complex rituals that could take days to complete. The word-bearers' approach to recruitment evolved to prioritize spiritual compatibility over purely physical qualifications, recognizing that their new mission required warriors who could withstand exposure to chaos energies without succumbing to madness or corruption. The Legion's apothecaries developed screening procedures that evaluated candidates' psychological resilience alongside their genetic compatibility with Space Marine implants. These tests included exposure to minor warp phenomena and evaluation of the candidate's response to theological instruction, ensuring that new recruits possessed the mental flexibility necessary to adapt to the Legion's transformed nature. The indoctrination process for new recruits incorporated elements of both traditional Space Marine training and intensive theological education. Neophytes learned to recite passages from the Book of Lorgar alongside combat drills, while their physical conditioning included exercises designed to prepare them for the supernatural stresses they would encounter as full battle brothers. The process culminated in a ritual initiation that involved direct communion with lesser demon entities, marking the recruits' acceptance into the Legion's spiritual brotherhood. The Word-Bearers' intelligence network expanded beyond traditional military reconnaissance to encompass systematic monitoring of warp phenomena and demon activity throughout their operational areas. The Legion's psychers maintained constant surveillance of the Immaterium, tracking the movements of supernatural entities and identifying opportunities for beneficial alliances or potential threats that required immediate attention. This intelligence proved invaluable in planning operations that relied on demon support, allowing commanders to coordinate their activities with the natural rhythms of warp-based phenomena. The establishment of permanent shrines on conquered worlds created infrastructure that could support ongoing chaos operations while providing focal points for local cult activity. These facilities served multiple purposes, functioning as command centers for military operations, temples for religious observances, and communication nodes for maintaining contact with demon entities. The shrine's construction followed architectural principles that enhanced the flow of warp energy, their geometric designs creating natural amplification effects that increased the effectiveness of rituals conducted within their walls. The Word-Bearers' approach to governing conquered populations emphasized spiritual transformation alongside political control, recognizing that lasting compliance required genuine conversion rather than mere submission. The Legion established schools where local children learned chaos theology alongside practical skills, while adult populations underwent re-education programs designed to replace imperial beliefs with proper understanding of the Dark God's nature. These efforts required careful coordination between military commanders and theological specialists, their success depending on the ability to present chaos worship as liberation rather than conquest. The Word-Bearers' mastery of forbidden arts reached its apex during the creation of the Ruinstorm, a cataclysmic working of sorcery that would reshape the galaxy's very fabric. This massive undertaking required the coordination of ritual sites across dozens of star systems, each location carefully selected for its psychic resonance and strategic importance to the Imperium's communication networks. The Dark Apostles who oversaw these preparations understood that they were attempting something unprecedented in human history, the deliberate sundering of real space on a galactic scale to facilitate the manifestation of warp entities in the material realm. The theoretical framework for the Ruinstorm's creation had emerged from years of study conducted in hidden libraries throughout Word-Bearer territory. Ancient texts recovered from demon worlds during the Legion's pilgrimage contained fragmentary references to similar workings attempted by long-dead civilizations, though none had possessed the resources or coordination necessary to achieve success on such a massive scale. The Word-Bearers' advantage lay not only in their enhanced capabilities as Space Marines, but in their systematic approach to understanding and cataloging the principles that governed warp manipulation. Erebus assumed primary responsibility for coordinating the ritual preparations, his extensive network of contacts throughout the traitor legions providing access to resources and personnel that would have been impossible for the Word-Bearers to assemble independently. The first chaplain's communications with cult cells across Imperial space had identified thousands of potential ritual sites, from ancient temples on civilized worlds to forgotten ruins on frontier planets where the boundary between real space and the Immaterium had already grown thin through millennia of neglect. The selection criteria for primary ritual sites reflected the Word-Bearers' deep understanding of how psychic phenomena interacted with physical geography and stellar mechanics. Worlds located at the intersection of major warp routes provided natural amplification for sorcerous workings, while planets with high concentrations of psychers in their population offered abundant psychic energy that could be harvested through mass sacrifice. The Legion's Tech Marines worked alongside corrupted members of the Mechanicum to identify locations where ancient archaeotech installations could be modified to serve as focusing arrays for the massive energies that would be unleashed. The construction phase of the Ruinstorm project required the Word-Bearers to operate with unprecedented secrecy while maintaining the appearance of normal Legion activities. Construction teams composed of trusted space marines and thoroughly indoctrinated cultists worked in shifts to carve the massive ritual circles and geometric patterns that would channel warp energy across interstellar distances. These installations often incorporated existing structures, with imperial temples and administrative buildings serving as foundations for far more sinister purposes. The ritual geometries themselves followed designs that had been revealed through direct communion with greater demon entities, their complex mathematical relationships reflecting principles that existed beyond normal human comprehension. Each circle incorporated thousands of individual symbols and sigils, their precise positioning calculated to create resonance effects that would amplify the psychic energy generated by the sacrificial offerings. The word-bearer's most skilled artificers spent months crafting the focusing crystals and metallic inlays that would channel these energies without allowing them to dissipate into random warp fluctuations. The procurement of sacrificial victims required careful planning to avoid arousing suspicion from imperial authorities or loyalist space marine forces operating in the same regions. The word-bearers established networks of human traffickers and slave traders who could provide the millions of souls that would be required for the ritual's completion, while their cult allies infiltrated planetary governments to redirect entire population centers toward the designated sacrifice sites. The logistics of moving such vast numbers of people without detection demanded the corruption of transportation networks and communication systems across multiple sectors. The timing of the Ruinstorm's activation required precise coordination with the broader strategic goals of the Horus heresy, ensuring that the warp storms would isolate key imperial strongholds at the moment when traitor forces were best positioned to exploit the resulting chaos. Erebus maintained constant communication with Horus's staff and the other traitor primarchs, adjusting the ritual schedule to accommodate changing military circumstances, while ensuring that the massive preparatory efforts would not be wasted through premature activation or inadequate coordination. The word-bearer's sorcerous capabilities had evolved far beyond the crude demon summoning that had characterized their early experiments with chaos worship. The Legion's most gifted psychers had learned to manipulate warp energy with surgical precision, their enhanced abilities allowing them to maintain stable channels between real space and the immaterium for extended periods. These techniques required years of training and practice, as the slightest error in concentration or ritual procedure could result in catastrophic feedback that would consume the practitioner's soul while unleashing uncontrolled demon entities in the surrounding area. The development of protective wards and binding circles represented one of the word-bearer's most significant achievements in practical sorcery. These defensive measures allowed the Legion's psychers to work with warp energies that would have instantly destroyed unprotected individuals, while simultaneously preventing the demon entities they summoned from turning against their summoners. The ward patterns incorporated elements from multiple chaos traditions, combining Kalkian religious symbolism with designs revealed through demon communication and mathematical principles derived from corrupted Mechanicum research. The demon pacts that the word-bearers negotiated during this period established formal relationships with warp entities that transcended the temporary alliances typical of conventional summoning. These agreements specified the terms under which demon legions would manifest in real space to support legion operations, while defining the obligations that the word-bearers would fulfill in exchange for supernatural assistance. The negotiations required extensive theological knowledge and diplomatic skill, as the alien psychology of demon entities made them unpredictable partners whose motivations often conflicted with human strategic objectives. The binding rituals that formalized these demonic alliances incorporated elements of both contract law and religious ceremony, creating agreements that possessed binding force in both the material and immaterial realms. The word-bearer's most experienced dark apostles served as negotiators in these proceedings, their enhanced understanding of demon nature allowing them to identify potential loopholes or ambiguities that could be exploited by their supernatural partners. The resulting pacts often required the Legion to fulfill specific obligations, such as conducting regular sacrificial offerings or establishing permanent shrines dedicated to particular demon entities. The establishment of demon worlds within areas under word-bearer control provided the Legion with secure bases where they could conduct large-scale sorcerous workings without interference from imperial forces. These planets underwent systematic corruption that transformed their physical laws and environmental conditions to better accommodate warp entities, their atmospheres becoming saturated with psychic energy that facilitated communion between the material and immaterial realms. The native populations of these worlds served as both workforce and sacrificial stock, their gradual mutation under prolonged warp exposure creating hybrid beings that could survive in environments that would be lethal to normal humans. The terraforming processes that created these demon worlds required the word-bearers to master techniques that combined conventional engineering with supernatural manipulation. Atmospheric processors were modified to introduce warp-tainted gases that would gradually alter the planetary environment, while geological surveys identified locations where the planet's crust could be breached to allow direct access to warp energy sources deep beneath the surface. The resulting worlds bore little resemblance to their original forms, their landscapes twisted into geometries that reflected the alien aesthetics of their demon inhabitants. The population management systems developed for these corrupted worlds reflected the word-bearers' understanding that different types of demon entities required specific environmental conditions and sacrificial offerings to maintain their presence in real space. Agricultural zones were established to produce the specialized crops and livestock that served as offerings to particular demon types, while industrial facilities manufactured the ritual implements and ceremonial objects required for ongoing worship activities. The human populations underwent systematic breeding programs designed to produce individuals with enhanced psychic sensitivity or other traits that made them more valuable as sacrificial offerings. The word-bearers' approach to demon summoning evolved from the crude rituals they had initially learned during their pilgrimage to encompass sophisticated techniques that could produce predictable results under battlefield conditions. The Legion's chaplains developed standardized procedures for summoning different categories of demon entities, their methodologies refined through countless trials that identified the optimal combinations of ritual components, psychic energy expenditure, and environmental factors. These procedures were documented in field manuals that allowed even relatively inexperienced practitioners to conduct successful summonings with minimal risk of catastrophic failure. The tactical integration of demon allies into conventional military operations required the development of new command and control procedures that could accommodate the unpredictable nature of warp entities. The word-bearers learned to structure their battle plans around the capabilities and limitations of their supernatural allies, recognizing that demon entities operated according to motivations and behavioral patterns that differed fundamentally from those of human or space marine forces. The most successful operations combined demon shock troops with conventional word-bearer units, the supernatural entities serving as force multipliers that could tip the balance of engagements through their immunity to conventional weapons and their ability to manifest in unexpected locations. The communication protocols established between word-bearer commanders and their demon allies reflected the complex relationship between material and immaterial beings operating in the same tactical environment. The Legion Psychers served as interpreters and coordinators, their enhanced abilities allowing them to maintain real-time communication with demon entities whose thought processes operated at speeds and scales that exceeded normal human comprehension. These communication links required constant maintenance and adjustment, as the psychic interference generated by large-scale combat operations could disrupt the delicate connections between real space and the warp. The logistical requirements for supporting demon allies created unique challenges that the word-bearers addressed through the development of specialized supply chains and maintenance procedures. Demon entities required regular offerings of psychic energy, blood, and other materials that sustained their presence in real space. while their weapons and equipment needed maintenance using techniques that combined conventional engineering with sorcerous ritual. The Legion established mobile shrines and portable summoning circles that could be deployed in forward areas to provide the spiritual infrastructure necessary for maintaining demon allies during extended campaigns. The Word-Bearer's mastery of warp manipulation extended beyond simple demon summoning to encompass more subtle techniques that could influence the flow of psychic energy across interstellar distances. The Legion's most skilled practitioners learned to create standing warp currents that could accelerate their ships' travel times while impeding enemy movements, effectively reshaping the galaxy's psychic geography to provide strategic advantages. These techniques required precise timing and coordination between multiple psykers operating from different locations, their combined efforts creating effects that could persist for months or even years after the initial ritual work had been completed. The development of warp-based communication networks allowed the Word-Bearers to maintain contact with their far-flung forces and cult allies despite the disruption of conventional astropathic channels caused by the Ruin Storm's creation. These networks utilized demon entities as message carriers, their ability to traverse the immaterium instantaneously providing communication capabilities that exceeded anything available to loyalist Imperial forces. The messages transmitted through these channels often arrived corrupted or distorted by their passage through the warp, requiring the development of encoding techniques that could preserve essential information while filtering out the random psychic interference that accompanied demon-mediated communication. The establishment of permanent warp rifts at strategic locations throughout Word-Bearer territory created gateways that allowed for rapid deployment of demon reinforcements and the transportation of personnel and equipment across vast distances without relying on conventional spacecraft. These rifts required constant maintenance to prevent them from either collapsing or expanding beyond controllable limits, their stability dependent on regular sacrificial offerings and the continuous attention of skilled psykers. The Word-Bearers constructed fortress shrines around the most important rifts, their defensive installations protecting the gateway sites while providing staging areas for forces transitioning between real space and the immaterium. The convergence of traitor forces in the Sol system marked the culmination of 7 years of civil war that had torn the Imperium apart. The Word-Bearers arrived at Terra's doorstep not as the pious evangelists they had once been, but as harbingers of humanity's spiritual transformation under the guidance of the true gods. Their crimson and gold fleet bore the scars of countless engagements across the galaxy, their hulls adorned with blasphemous sigils that pulsed with warp energy and demon-forged modifications that exceeded the capabilities of standard Imperial vessels. Lorgar's primary objective during the Siege of Terra extended far beyond mere military conquest. While his brother Primarchs focused on breaching the Imperial Palace's defenses and reaching the Emperor, the Word-Bearer's mission encompassed the systematic corruption of Terra's population and the establishment of permanent warp rifts that would transform humanity's birth world into a demon world. The Primarch understood that true victory required not just the Emperor's death, but the complete spiritual subjugation of the species he had sought to guide towards secular enlightenment. The Word-Bearer's assault formations incorporated demon allies on a scale never before attempted in real space combat. Entire companies of space marines advanced alongside legions of warp entities, their combined forces creating a supernatural army that defied conventional tactical analysis. The demons manifested in forms that reflected their patron god's domains, bloodletters of corn carved through loyalist defenders with demon-forged blades, while horrors of Tzeentch unleashed cascades of mutagenic fire that transformed Imperial soldiers into writhing masses of corrupted flesh. The coordination between Space Marine and demon forces required constant attention from the Legion's Dark Apostles, their psychic abilities strained to the breaking point as they maintained the binding rituals that kept their supernatural allies focused on military objectives rather than their own chaotic impulses. The demon entities operated according to alien motivations that often conflicted with human strategic priorities, their tendency toward random destruction requiring careful management to prevent them from undermining the word-bearer's broader goals. The assault on the imperial palace's outer defenses revealed the extent to which the word-bearers had evolved beyond conventional warfare. Rather than relying solely on overwhelming firepower or tactical superiority, they employed sorcerous techniques that bypassed physical fortifications entirely. Squads of possessed marines phased through solid walls using warp-based translocation, while dark apostles opened temporary rifts that allowed demon reinforcements to manifest directly behind enemy lines. The palace's defenders found themselves facing enemies that violated every principle of warfare they had been trained to counter. Imperial fists who had spent decades perfecting defensive strategies against conventional assault discovered that their carefully prepared kill zones and overlapping fields of fire proved ineffective against entities that could teleport at will or ignore physical barriers entirely. The psychological impact of facing supernatural opponents proved as devastating as their actual combat capabilities, with veteran soldiers breaking ranks when confronted by horrors that their minds could not process. The word-bearer's coordination with other traitor legions during the siege required delicate negotiation and careful resource allocation. The Iron Warrior's systematic approach to siege warfare complemented the 17th Legion's supernatural capabilities, with Perdurabo's artillery providing covering fire for demon summoning rituals, while word-bearer sorcerers opened breaches in the palace's void shields that conventional weapons could not penetrate. The Death Guard's stoic advance through the palace's lower levels created opportunities for the word-bearers to establish ritual sites in captured territory. The World Eater's berserker charges, while tactically crude, served the word-bearers' purposes by creating the massive casualties necessary to fuel large-scale demon summoning. The blood spilled by Angron's warriors in their frenzied assaults generated psychic energy that the word-bearers' psychers could channel into increasingly powerful rituals. The Red Angel's own presence on the battlefield created a resonance with Khorne's realm that facilitated the manifestation of greater demon entities, without requiring the extensive preparatory work normally necessary for such summonings. The Night Lord's terror tactics complemented the word-bearers' psychological warfare, their brutal methods creating the fear and despair that weakened the palace defenders' spiritual resistance to chaos corruption. Civilians who witnessed the 8th Legion's atrocities became more susceptible to the word-bearers' theological arguments, their traumatized minds seeking any explanation that could make sense of the horrors they had experienced. The combination of physical terror and spiritual corruption proved devastatingly effective in breaking down the Imperial defenders' morale. The Emperor's children provided the word-bearers with specialized expertise in urban warfare and close-quarters combat within the palace's labyrinthine interior. The 3rd Legion's pursuit of perfection in all forms of warfare had led them to develop techniques for fighting in confined spaces that proved invaluable during the assault on the palace's inner sanctums. Their coordination with word-bearer demon allies created combined arms formations that could adapt to the rapidly changing tactical situation within the massive fortress complex. The establishment of permanent ritual sites within the captured sections of the Imperial Palace required the word-bearers to balance military necessity with theological imperatives. Each shrine they constructed served both as a staging area for demon summoning and as a symbol of the Chaos God's dominion over humanity's most sacred spaces. The Dark Apostles overseeing these installations faced constant pressure from their military commanders to prioritize tactical considerations while maintaining the spiritual significance that made these sites effective focal points for warp energy. The corruption of the palace's civilian population proceeded through techniques that the word-bearers had refined during their campaigns across the galaxy. Refugees fleeing the outer battles found themselves herded into areas where word-bearer chaplains conducted mass conversion ceremonies, their enhanced charisma and psychic abilities overwhelming the traumatized civilians' resistance to theological indoctrination. The converted populations became valuable assets, their intimate knowledge of the palace's layout and their ability to move through areas that would be heavily defended against Space Marine infiltrators, making them ideal intelligence sources and saboteurs. The confrontation between Lorgar and Corvus Corax represented more than a simple duel between primarchs. It embodied the fundamental philosophical conflict that had driven the Horus heresy from its inception. The Raven Guard's primarch arrived at the battle site through methods that demonstrated his legion's mastery of stealth and infiltration, his forces having penetrated deep into Word-bearer-controlled territory without detection. Corax's pale features bore the marks of 7 years of constant warfare, while his black eyes held a fury that had been building since the massacre at Istvan V. The Word-bearer's primarch had undergone his own transformation during the long years of civil war, his golden skin now bearing ritual scarifications that channeled warp energy, while his presence radiated an aura of supernatural authority that made even veteran Space Marines feel compelled to kneel in reverence. Lorgar's evolution from prophet to demon prince had progressed steadily throughout the heresy, his communion with the Chaos Gods granting him abilities that transcended his original nature as a gene-forged superhuman. The battle between the two primarchs raged across multiple levels of the Imperial Palace, their superhuman speed and strength creating destruction that exceeded anything their respective legions could achieve. Corax's lightning claws carved through ceramite and flesh with equal ease, while his mastery of stealth techniques allowed him to strike from unexpected angles before vanishing into shadows that seemed to bend around his form. Lorgar countered with sorcerous abilities that warped reality around him, his words of power creating barriers of crystallized warp energy, while his demon-forged weapons channeled the fury of the Chaos Gods themselves. The Word-bearer's supporting forces found themselves engaged in desperate fighting against Raven Guard infiltrators, who seemed to appear from nowhere, before disappearing back into the palace's maze of corridors and service passages. The 19th Legion's survivors had been transformed by their experiences during the heresy into something approaching living weapons, their hatred for the Word-bearers driving them to feats of martial prowess that exceeded even their enhanced capabilities. The running battles that accompanied the Primarch's duel created a secondary conflict that drew in increasing numbers of troops from both sides. The climax of the confrontation came when Lorgar attempted to complete a ritual that would have transformed the Imperial Palace's throne room into a permanent gateway to the warp. The massive summoning circle that his followers had carved into the floor of the Emperor's most sacred chamber represented months of careful preparation and the sacrifice of thousands of Imperial civilians. The ritual's completion would have allowed the Chaos Gods themselves to manifest physically in real space, ensuring that even the Emperor's death would not end their influence over humanity. Corax's intervention at the crucial moment demonstrated both his tactical brilliance and his absolute commitment to preventing the Word-bearers from achieving their ultimate goal. The Raven Guard Primarch's assault disrupted the ritual at its most critical phase, his lightning claws severing the psychic conduits that channeled warp energy into the summoning circle, while his presence created interference that prevented the demon entities from fully manifesting. The resulting psychic backlash devastated both Primarchs, their enhanced physiology barely sufficient to survive the unleashed energies. The Word-bearers' withdrawal from the throne room marked a turning point in their assault on the Imperial Palace, though their retreat was conducted in good order rather than as a panicked flight. The Legion's Dark Apostles recognized that the failed ritual had fundamentally altered the tactical situation, making it impossible to achieve their primary objective of establishing permanent warp rifts within the palace's most sacred spaces. The decision to redeploy their forces to secondary objectives reflected their disciplined approach to warfare even under the most challenging circumstances. The news of Horus's death reached the Word-bearers while they were consolidating their positions in the palace's outer districts, preparing for what they expected to be a prolonged siege that would culminate in the Emperor's eventual defeat. The War Master's fall to his father's blade created immediate confusion throughout the traitor forces, as the carefully coordinated assault began to lose cohesion without the central authority that had held the diverse factions together. The Word-Bearers' response to this crisis demonstrated both their organizational flexibility and their commitment to the broader goals of chaos worship that transcended any individual leader. Lorgar's decision to begin the Legion's withdrawal from Terra reflected his understanding that the heresy's failure as a military campaign did not negate its success as a spiritual revolution. The Word-Bearers had achieved something far more significant than the conquest of a single world. They had demonstrated that the Emperor was not invincible, and that the Chaos Gods offered a viable alternative to imperial doctrine. The seeds of corruption that they had planted throughout the galaxy would continue to grow regardless of the immediate military outcome, ensuring that humanity's spiritual evolution would continue even without the dramatic transformation that victory at Terra would have provided. The evacuation procedures that the Word-Bearers implemented during their withdrawal demonstrated the organizational skills they had developed during decades of complex military operations. The Legion's fleet coordination allowed them to extract their forces and their most valuable demon allies while maintaining defensive formations that prevented loyalist forces from interfering with the retreat. The Dark Apostles oversaw the systematic destruction of ritual sites that could not be defended, ensuring that their sacred installations would not fall into Imperial hands while preserving the knowledge and artifacts that would be essential for future operations. The transition from the Siege of Terra to the Long War required the Word-Bearers to fundamentally reconsider their strategic objectives and operational methods. The failure to achieve decisive victory through conventional military means had demonstrated the limitations of direct confrontation with Imperial forces, while the successful corruption of populations across the galaxy suggested that more subtle approaches might prove more effective in the long term. The Legion's leadership began developing new doctrines that emphasized gradual subversion and spiritual corruption over rapid conquest. The establishment of hidden bases in the Eye of Terror and other warp-touched regions provided the Word-Bearers with secure staging areas from which they could launch raids against Imperial targets, while maintaining the infrastructure necessary for large-scale demon summoning and ritual activities. These facilities combined military functionality with religious significance, their design incorporating both defensive fortifications and temple complexes, where the Legion's spiritual activities could continue without interference from Imperial forces. The retreat from Terra marked not an ending, but a transformation for the Word-Bearers Legion. As their crimson-hulled vessels departed the Sol system under cover of the warp storms that had begun consuming the galaxy's communication networks, Lorgar understood that the true war was only beginning. The siege had demonstrated the limitations of direct military confrontation with the Emperor's forces, but it had also revealed the immense potential of the corruption they had already seeded throughout Imperial space. The failure to kill the Master of Mankind mattered less than the successful demonstration that his supposed divinity could be challenged, and his servants turned against him. The journey to the Eye of Terror proceeded through warp routes that the Word-Bearers had mapped during their earlier pilgrimage, their navigators guided by demon entities whose knowledge of the Immaterium's currents exceeded anything possessed by Imperial astropaths. The fleet's composition reflected the Legion's evolution during the heresy. Alongside traditional battle barges and strike cruisers sailed vessels that defied conventional classification, their hulls twisted by prolonged exposure to warp energies, and their weapon systems incorporating demon-forged components that pulsed with malevolent life. The establishment of Sikaris as the Legion's primary stronghold required extensive terraforming operations that combined conventional engineering with large-scale sorcerous workings. The demon world that would become their new home existed in a state of constant flux when the Word-Bearers first arrived, its surface shifting between different configurations as competing warp entities imposed their will upon its malleable reality. The Dark Apostles who oversaw the planet's transformation understood that creating a stable base of operations would require them to negotiate with the existing demon inhabitants while establishing their own authority over the world's supernatural ecosystem. The construction of the Templum Inficio represented the word-bearer's most ambitious architectural project since the destruction of Monarchia. This massive fortress cathedral served simultaneously as the Legion's command center, their primary ritual site, and a monument to the four gods whose worship had become central to their identity. The structure's design incorporated elements from Colchian religious architecture, alongside geometric patterns revealed through communion with greater demon entities, creating a building that existed partially in real space and partially in the warp. The templum's construction required materials that could withstand the constant warp storms that swept across Sicarius's surface. The word-bearer's techmarines worked alongside corrupted members of the Dark Mechanicum to develop new alloys that incorporated demon essence into their molecular structure, creating substances that grew stronger when exposed to psychic energy rather than being degraded by it. The building process itself became a form of worship, with construction crews conducting ritual observances at each stage of the work, while demon entities provided supernatural assistance with tasks that exceeded normal human capabilities. The organization of Sicarius's population reflected the word-bearer's understanding of how to create a sustainable society based on chaos worship. The planet's human inhabitants were organized into hierarchical castes that corresponded to different aspects of service to the dark gods. Warrior castes provided military support and conducted raids against imperial targets, while priest castes maintained the ritual observances necessary to keep the demon population satisfied and cooperative. Artisan castes manufactured the specialized equipment required for sorceress workings, their skills enhanced through demon-granted insights that allowed them to create objects that transcended the boundaries between technology and magic. The integration of demon entities into Sicarius's administrative structure created unique challenges that the word-bearers addressed through the development of new governmental frameworks. Unlike human administrators who could be controlled through conventional authority structures, demon entities operated according to motivations and behavioral patterns that reflected their alien psychology. The Dark Apostles learned to manage these supernatural citizens through a combination of negotiation, ritual obligation, and carefully structured hierarchies that channeled demon ambitions toward constructive purposes. The agricultural systems established on Sicarius bore little resemblance to conventional farming methods. The planet's warp-touched environment required specialized crops that could thrive in conditions where the normal laws of biology held no sway. The word-bearers developed cultivation techniques that incorporated ritual elements alongside traditional agricultural practices, their farmers conducting daily observances that encouraged plant growth while appeasing the demon entities whose presence influenced local environmental conditions. The resulting harvests provided sustenance for the human population while producing the specialized materials required for large-scale sorceress workings. The establishment of recruitment networks throughout the Eye of Terror allowed the word-bearers to maintain their numbers despite the casualties they had suffered during the heresy. The Legion scouts identified populations on demon worlds whose genetic heritage made them suitable candidates for Space Marine implantation, while their diplomatic contacts with other Chaos factions provided access to prisoners and volunteers who could undergo the transformation process. The recruitment procedures incorporated extensive psychological screening to ensure that candidates possessed the mental flexibility necessary to adapt to life as servants of the dark gods. The training programs developed for new recruits emphasized spiritual development alongside traditional military instruction. Neophytes learned to channel warp energy through focused meditation while mastering the use of demon weapons and other supernatural equipment. The indoctrination process included direct exposure to lesser demon entities under controlled conditions, allowing recruits to develop the psychological resilience necessary to work alongside supernatural allies without succumbing to madness or corruption beyond their ability to control. The word-bearers' participation in Abaddon's Black Crusades reflected their understanding that the Long War required coordinated action among the various Chaos factions. The Legion's Dark Apostles served as theological advisors to the War Master's planning councils, their expertise in demon summoning and warp manipulation, providing capabilities that complemented the tactical skills of other traitor commanders. The Word-Bearers' contributions to these massive campaigns typically focused on establishing the spiritual infrastructure necessary to support large-scale demon manifestations, while conducting the psychological warfare operations that weakened Imperial defenders' morale. The First Black Crusade saw the Word-Bearers deploying in their traditional role as shock troops whose supernatural allies could break through defensive positions that conventional forces could not penetrate. Their assault formations incorporated lessons learned during the Siege of Terra, with Dark Apostles coordinating demon summoning rituals that could be conducted under battlefield conditions, while maintaining the binding protocols necessary to prevent their supernatural allies from turning against their summoners. The Legion's performance during this campaign established their reputation as reliable allies whose theological expertise made them valuable partners for other Chaos commanders. The coordination between Word-Bearer forces and Abaddon's own Black Legion required careful negotiation of command authority and operational priorities. The Sons of Horus veterans who formed the core of the War Master's new Legion possessed extensive experience in large-scale military operations, but they lacked the specialized knowledge necessary to effectively utilize demon allies or conduct the complex rituals that had become essential elements of Chaos warfare. The Word-Bearers provided this expertise while maintaining their own command structure and operational independence. The development of demon engines as standard equipment for Word-Bearer forces represented a significant advancement in their military capabilities. These war machines combined the mechanical expertise of corrupted tech marines with the supernatural insights gained through demon communion, creating vehicles that possessed capabilities far exceeding those of conventional Imperial equipment. The engine's crews underwent surgical modifications that bonded their nervous systems with demon entities, creating hybrid beings whose enhanced reflexes and supernatural perception made them devastatingly effective in combat. The maintenance requirements for these demon engines created new logistical challenges that the Word-Bearers addressed through the establishment of specialized forge shrines throughout their territory. These facilities combined traditional mechanical workshops with ritual spaces where the demon entities inhabiting the war machines could receive the offerings and observances necessary to maintain their cooperation. The forge priests who oversaw these installations required training in both engineering and theology, their duties encompassing mechanical maintenance, alongside the spiritual obligations necessary to keep demon engines functioning properly. The Word-Bearers' approach to raiding Imperial worlds evolved throughout the millennia to emphasize corruption and conversion over simple destruction. Their assault forces typically included extensive contingents of Chaos cultists, whose role extended beyond military support to encompass the establishment of permanent cells that could continue subversive activities after the main force withdrew. These cultists received training in propaganda techniques and psychological manipulation that allowed them to gradually convert local populations to Chaos worship through methods that avoided detection by Imperial authorities. The selection of raid targets reflected careful intelligence analysis that identified worlds whose populations possessed characteristics that made them particularly susceptible to corruption. Agricultural worlds with strong religious traditions proved especially vulnerable to theological arguments that presented the Chaos gods as more powerful and benevolent alternatives to the Emperor's distant authority. Hive worlds whose populations suffered under oppressive working conditions could be corrupted through promises of liberation and empowerment that Chaos worship supposedly offered. The establishment of hidden shrines on raided worlds required construction techniques that could create permanent installations while avoiding detection by Imperial reconnaissance efforts. The Word-Bearers developed modular shrine components that could be assembled quickly during raids and concealed within existing structures or underground locations. These installations served as focal points for ongoing cult activities while providing communication links with Sikaris and other Word-Bearer strongholds throughout the Eye of Terror. The word-bearers' intelligence networks expanded throughout the millennia to encompass systematic monitoring of imperial activities across multiple sectors. Their agents operated under deep cover identities within imperial institutions, their positions providing access to strategic information about military deployments, administrative policies, and potential vulnerabilities that could be exploited during future operations. The intelligence gathered through these networks proved invaluable in planning raids and identifying opportunities for large-scale corruption efforts. The coordination of these intelligence operations required secure communication methods that could function despite imperial efforts to monitor and intercept chaos transmissions. The word-bearers developed encoding techniques that incorporated theological elements alongside conventional cryptographic methods, creating messages that appeared to be routine religious communications while actually containing detailed intelligence reports. The demon entities that served as message carriers could traverse the warp instantaneously, providing communication capabilities that exceeded anything available to Imperial forces. The preservation of Legion cohesion throughout 10 millennia of warfare required constant attention to both practical and spiritual considerations. The word-bearers maintained their organizational structure through regular gatherings, where dark apostles from different companies could coordinate their activities and share theological insights gained through their individual experiences. These assemblies served both administrative and religious functions, their proceedings encompassing strategic planning alongside ritual observances that reinforced the spiritual bonds connecting all members of the Legion. The development of standardized doctrinal texts ensured that word-bearer forces operating in different regions maintained consistent theological understanding despite their physical separation. The Book of Lorgar underwent regular revision and expansion as new insights were gained through communion with demon entities and practical experience in conducting large-scale corruption operations. These updated versions were distributed throughout the Legion's territory through networks of scribes and missionaries, whose duties encompassed both preservation of sacred knowledge and its dissemination to distant outposts. The word-bearers' approach to managing their demon allies evolved into sophisticated protocols that balanced the entity's alien motivations with military necessity. The Legion's most experienced Dark Apostles developed specialized techniques for negotiating with different categories of demon entities, their methods tailored to the specific psychological characteristics and behavioral patterns displayed by servants of each Chaos God. These negotiation protocols were documented in classified manuals that provided guidance for field commanders who lacked extensive theological training but needed to coordinate demon support for their operations. The transformation of Sikaris from a simple demon whirled into the beating heart of word-bearer power required engineering feats that pushed the boundaries between technology and sorcery. The planet's surface, once a chaotic landscape of shifting terrain and competing warp influences, gradually stabilized under the focused will of the Legion's most powerful Dark Apostles. Massive ritual circles carved into the bedrock created geometric patterns visible from orbit, their intersecting lines channeling the planet's abundant warp energy into controlled flows that could power both industrial facilities and religious observances. The construction of the Basilica of the Word began with the systematic clearing of a vast plateau that had previously served as a battleground between rival demon factions. The Word-bearers' approach to this monumental undertaking reflected their understanding that the structure would serve as more than a mere fortress. It would function as a living symbol of their Legion's spiritual authority and a focal point for their ongoing communion with the Chaos Gods. The foundation work alone required 3 standard years to complete, with construction crews working in shifts around the clock, while Dark Apostles maintained protective wards that prevented demon interference with the delicate engineering processes. The Basilica's central spire rose nearly 2 kilometers above the planetary surface, its twisted architecture incorporating elements that existed partially in real space and partially in the warp. The structure's walls were constructed from materials that defied conventional analysis, stone that had been quarried from demon worlds, and blessed through rituals that bound warp entities into its crystalline matrix, creating building materials that grew stronger when exposed to psychic energy. The spire's apex housed the Legion's primary communication array, a device that combined Vox technology with demon-possessed components capable of transmitting messages across the galaxy instantaneously through warp-based channels. The interior spaces of the basilica reflected the word-bearer's evolution from simple warriors into a theocratic hierarchy that governed both mortal populations and supernatural entities. The main cathedral could accommodate over 50,000 worshippers simultaneously, its vaulted ceiling decorated with frescoes that depicted the four gods in their various aspects, while chronicling the Legion's journey from imperial loyalty to chaos devotion. The walls themselves pulsed with a faint luminescence that emanated from the demon essence incorporated into their construction, creating an atmosphere that inspired both reverence and unease in mortal visitors. The chapter houses that surrounded the central cathedral served as headquarters for the Legion's various companies and specialized units. Each structure was designed according to architectural principles that reflected the specific chaos god favored by its inhabitants, creating a diverse complex where buildings dedicated to Khorne's worship featured aggressive angles and blood-red stonework, while those honoring Tzeentch incorporated impossible geometries that seemed to shift when observed directly. The Nurgle-aligned sections of the complex embraced decay as a natural process, their walls covered in carefully cultivated growths that served both decorative and practical purposes. The training facilities established within the Basilica complex represented the most advanced military education system ever developed by a Chaos Space Marine Legion. The word-bearers had learned through millennia of warfare that their role as spiritual leaders required them to master not only conventional combat techniques, but also the complex arts of demon summoning, warp manipulation, and theological debate. The training regimens developed for new recruits incorporated all these elements, creating space marines who could function equally effectively as shock troops, sorcerers, or missionary diplomats depending on operational requirements. The combat training areas included specialized chambers where neophytes could practice fighting alongside demon allies under controlled conditions. These facilities were equipped with containment systems that could instantly banish summoned entities if they became hostile, while monitoring equipment allowed instructors to evaluate each recruit's ability to coordinate with supernatural partners. The training scenarios included everything from simple skirmish actions to complex multi-phase operations that required precise timing between material and immaterial forces. The theological education provided to word-bearer recruits encompassed far more than simple indoctrination in chaos worship. The Legion scholars had developed comprehensive curricula that covered the history and philosophy of dozens of different religious traditions, providing their students with the knowledge necessary to identify and exploit the spiritual vulnerabilities of various human populations. This education included practical instruction in rhetoric, psychology, and cultural analysis, skills that proved essential when conducting conversion operations on worlds with diverse belief systems. The sorceress training facilities represented perhaps the most dangerous aspect of the word-bearer educational system. These chambers were designed to safely expose students to increasing levels of warp energy while teaching them to channel that power through focused ritual and meditation. The process carried inherent risks, as exposure to raw chaos energy could result in mutation, madness, or possession by hostile entities. The Legion's most experienced psychers served as instructors in these programs, their enhanced abilities allowing them to intervene if students lost control of the forces they were attempting to manipulate. The Basilica's archives contain the most comprehensive collection of forbidden knowledge in the galaxy, their vaults housing texts that predated the Age of Strife, alongside contemporary works that documented the Legion's ongoing theological research. The preservation of this knowledge required specialized storage techniques that could protect written materials from the corrosive effects of prolonged warp exposure, while ensuring that the information remained accessible to authorized researchers. The archive chambers were equipped with reading rooms where scholars could study dangerous texts under controlled conditions, their exposure to corrupting influences carefully monitored and limited. The recruitment networks that supplied new candidates for the Word-Bearer Legion extended throughout the Eye of Terror and beyond, reaching into imperial space through networks of chaos cults and corrupted officials. The Legion's scouts identified potential recruits based on criteria that emphasized spiritual compatibility alongside physical capability, recognizing that their transformed nature required warriors who could withstand exposure to chaos energies without losing their sanity or effectiveness. The selection process included extensive psychological evaluation designed to identify individuals whose personalities would mesh well with the Legion's theocratic culture. The surgical facilities where recruits underwent their transformation into Space Marines incorporated demon-enhanced medical technology that exceeded anything available to Loyalist forces. The Word-Bearers' apothecaries had learned to accelerate the implantation process while reducing the risk of rejection or complication, their techniques refined through centuries of experimentation and demon-granted insights into human physiology. The operating theaters were equipped with monitoring systems that could detect signs of chaos corruption during the transformation process, allowing medical staff to adjust procedures to accommodate the unique requirements of recruits who would be expected to work closely with warp entities. The indoctrination chambers where new Space Marines learned their role within the Legion's hierarchy combined traditional military instruction with intensive theological education. These facilities were designed to immerse recruits in the Legion's culture, while gradually introducing them to the realities of serving alongside demon allies and conducting sorceress operations. The indoctrination process included direct exposure to lesser warp entities under carefully controlled conditions, allowing new Marines to develop the psychological resilience necessary for their future duties. The command and control systems that coordinated Word-Bearer operations across the galaxy operated from the Basilica's central nerve center, a vast chamber filled with communication equipment that combined conventional technology with demon-possessed components. The facility's operators maintained constant contact with Legion forces deployed throughout Imperial space, their duties encompassing everything from tactical coordination to the transmission of new theological insights discovered through ongoing research. The communication systems incorporated multiple layers of encryption and misdirection, designed to prevent Imperial forces from intercepting or decoding sensitive transmissions. The strategic planning facilities housed within the Basilica reflected the Word-Bearers' understanding that their long-term goals required careful coordination of military, political, and spiritual operations across multiple theaters. The Legion's command staff included specialists in intelligence analysis, logistics coordination, and theological assessment, their combined expertise enabling them to develop comprehensive strategies that addressed both immediate tactical objectives and broader conversion goals. The planning chambers were equipped with holographic displays that could present real-time information about conditions throughout the galaxy, allowing commanders to adjust their strategies based on current intelligence. The industrial facilities that supported the Basilica's operations represented a fusion of conventional manufacturing with demon-enhanced production techniques. The forges where the Legion's weapons and equipment were manufactured incorporated supernatural elements that allowed them to create armaments that exceeded the capabilities of standard Imperial gear. The production lines included demon-possessed machinery that could work continuously without maintenance, while producing items that incorporated warp-touched materials and blessing rituals that enhanced their effectiveness. The weapon testing ranges where new equipment underwent evaluation included specialized chambers that could safely contain the exotic energies generated by demon weapons and sorceress devices. These facilities allowed the Legion's artificers to refine their designs while ensuring that new equipment met the demanding requirements of chaos warfare. The testing procedures included evaluation of how different weapons performed against various types of enemies, from conventional Imperial forces to rival demon entities that might be encountered during operations in the Eye of Terror. The diplomatic facilities where the word-bearers conducted negotiations with other chaos factions reflected their role as theological authorities within the broader chaos hierarchy. These chambers were designed to accommodate representatives from various demon species and corrupted human organizations. Their furnishings and environmental controls adjusted to meet the specific requirements of different types of visitors. The negotiation protocols developed by the Legion's diplomatic corps emphasized the spiritual aspects of any agreements while ensuring that practical considerations received appropriate attention. The medical facilities that maintained the health of the Legion's personnel incorporated healing techniques that combined conventional medicine with warp-based regeneration methods. The word-bearers' medical staff had learned to treat injuries and conditions that resulted from prolonged exposure to chaos energies, their expertise encompassing both physical trauma and the psychological effects of communion with demon entities. The medical chambers included specialized equipment for treating space marines whose bodies had been modified by warp exposure, ensuring that such changes enhanced rather than hindered their combat effectiveness. The recreational facilities provided within the Basilica complex served important psychological functions for space marines who spent decades or centuries away from their home base conducting operations throughout the galaxy. These areas included libraries where off-duty personnel could study theological texts, training halls where they could maintain their combat skills, and meditation chambers where they could commune with their patron deities. The recreational activities emphasized spiritual development alongside physical relaxation, recognizing that the Legion's demanding lifestyle required careful attention to both aspects of their members' well-being. The transportation networks that connected different sections of the Basilica complex included both conventional corridors and teleportation chambers that utilized controlled warp rifts to enable rapid movement across the vast structure. The teleportation systems required constant maintenance by skilled technicians who understood both the mechanical and spiritual aspects of warp-based transportation, their duties encompassing regular recalibration of the dimensional anchors that prevented travelers from becoming lost in the immaterium during transit. The opening of the Great Rift in the 42nd millennium created opportunities that the word-bearers had spent 10,000 years preparing to exploit. The massive warp storm that split the galaxy in half disrupted Imperial communication networks and isolated entire sectors from Terra's authority, creating power vacuums that chaos forces could fill with unprecedented ease. The word-bearers emerged from their strongholds in the Eye of Terror not as desperate raiders, but as a fully organized theocratic state ready to claim vast territories for the Dark Gods. Sikaris served as the command center for coordinated assaults across dozens of sectors simultaneously. The Basilica of the Word's communication arrays, enhanced by demon-possessed components that could transmit through the chaotic warp currents of the Great Rift, maintained contact with word-bearer forces operating throughout the galaxy. Dark apostles who had spent centuries in deep cover positions within Imperial institutions activated their sleeper networks, triggering uprisings that coincided perfectly with external military assaults to maximize confusion and prevent effective Imperial response. The Legion's current disposition reflects their evolution from a single military formation into a distributed network of semi-autonomous warbands united by common theological principles. The primary host of the Word remains based on Sikaris under the direct command of surviving Dark Apostles from the original Legion, their forces numbering approximately 12,000 space marines, supported by millions of cultist auxiliaries and demon allies. These core forces serve as strategic reserves and rapid response elements that can be deployed to support major operations or exploit unexpected opportunities. The Crimson Slaughter Warband, originally loyalist space marines corrupted through prolonged exposure to word-bearer theological influence, operates throughout the Segmentum Solar, conducting systematic conversion campaigns on worlds that have lost contact with Imperial authority. Their methods combine the word-bearers' proven corruption techniques with intimate knowledge of Imperial military doctrine gained through their previous service to the Emperor. The warband's leader, Dark Apostle Cranon the Relentless, maintains regular communication with Sicarius while adapting Legion doctrine to the specific challenges of operating in heavily defended core Imperial territories. The Brazen Disciples have established themselves as the dominant chaos force in the Maelstrom, their demon world strongholds serving as staging areas for raids throughout the Segmentum Ultima. This warband specializes in large-scale demon summoning operations that can overwhelm Imperial defenses through sheer supernatural force rather than tactical sophistication. Their Dark Apostles have negotiated exclusive pacts with several greater demon entities, granting them access to supernatural allies that exceed the capabilities available to most other chaos forces. The Word of Shadow operates primarily within the Ghoul Stars, exploiting the region's isolation and mysterious threats to conduct experiments in mass corruption that would be impossible in more heavily monitored areas of the galaxy. This warband has developed specialized techniques for corrupting Xenos populations, their theological research expanding word-bearer doctrine to encompass non-human species whose spiritual nature differs fundamentally from baseline humanity. Their discoveries have implications for the Legion's long-term goals of galactic conversion, as they demonstrate that chaos corruption can transcend species barriers. The Sanctified Warband maintains hidden bases throughout the Eastern Fringe, their operations focused on corrupting newly discovered human colonies before they can be properly integrated into Imperial authority structures. These forces operate with exceptional secrecy, their members trained in deep infiltration techniques that allow them to pose as Imperial missionaries or administrative officials while systematically undermining local governments and religious institutions. The warband's success rate in converting entire planetary populations without triggering Imperial military response exceeds 90%. The influence of word-bearer theological doctrine extends far beyond their own legion to encompass hundreds of smaller chaos warbands and cult organizations throughout the galaxy. The Book of Lorgar has been translated into thousands of human languages and dialects, its distribution facilitated by networks of corrupted merchants, pilgrim ships, and even some Imperial officials who have been gradually converted through careful exposure to its teachings. The text's theological arguments prove particularly effective among populations suffering under oppressive Imperial rule or facing existential threats that Imperial authorities seem unable to address. The Apostles of the Blind King represent one of the most successful examples of word-bearer doctrinal influence spreading beyond their own legion. This warband of former Imperial fists was corrupted through a decades-long campaign that began with the infiltration of their chapter's chaplaincy and gradually spread throughout their command structure. The corrupted Space Marines retain their expertise in siege warfare while adding demon summoning capabilities that make them devastatingly effective against fortified Imperial positions. Their successful assault on the fortress world of Mordian demonstrated how word-bearer corruption techniques could transform even the most loyal Imperial forces into effective chaos weapons. The Covenant of Fire operates throughout the Segmentum Tempestus, their activities focused on corrupting Imperial Guard regiments through the systematic placement of word-bearer agents within regimental chaplain corps and commissariat structures. The warband's methods emphasize gradual theological conversion rather than dramatic revelation, allowing them to turn entire military formations without triggering the suspicion that more obvious corruption attempts might generate. Corrupted guard regiments continue to serve Imperial objectives while secretly advancing chaos goals, their dual loyalty creating intelligence networks that provide invaluable strategic information. The Sons of Erebus maintain the largest network of chaos cults operating within Imperial space, their cells embedded within every major institution from planetary governments to Space Marine chapters. These cultists operate according to protocols developed by the original Erebus during the Horus heresy, their activities coordinated through communication networks that utilize demon messengers and psychic channels that remain undetectable to Imperial authorities. The cult network serves multiple functions, providing intelligence about imperial military movements while conducting sabotage operations that weaken imperial defenses in advance of major chaos assaults. The theological influence of word-bearer doctrine has proven particularly effective among populations facing the galaxy's numerous existential threats. Worlds threatened by Tyrannid hive fleets find the promise of demon protection more compelling than imperial assurances of eventual military support, while populations suffering under orc invasions often embrace chaos worship after witnessing the supernatural powers that word-bearer intervention can provide. The Legion's missionaries present their doctrine not as rebellion against legitimate authority, but as pragmatic acceptance of the only powers capable of ensuring human survival in an increasingly hostile galaxy. The corruption of imperial religious institutions represents one of the word-bearers' most significant achievements in the current millennium. Their agents have infiltrated the ecclesiarchy at every level, from local parish priests to cardinal-level positions within the organization's highest councils. These corrupted officials gradually modify imperial religious doctrine to incorporate elements that make populations more susceptible to full chaos conversion. Their change is subtle enough to avoid detection, while creating theological foundations that support eventual revelation of the Dark God's true nature. The Word-Bearer's approach to converting Space Marine chapters has evolved to emphasize long-term infiltration over direct confrontation. Their agents target chapters suffering from recruitment difficulties, equipment shortages, or isolation from Imperial support networks, offering assistance that comes with carefully concealed theological conditions. The corruption process typically spans decades or centuries, with word-bearer advisors gradually introducing chaos elements into chapter traditions and combat doctrines, until the targeted Marines find themselves fully committed to serving the Dark Gods without understanding how their transformation occurred. The Legion's current military capabilities reflect 10 millennia of continuous warfare and theological development. Their forces combine traditional Space Marine equipment with demon weapons and warp-touched modifications that exceed the performance of standard Imperial gear. Word-bearer Tech Marines work alongside corrupted members of the Dark Mechanicum to maintain and upgrade their equipment, their combined expertise producing war machines that incorporate both advanced technology and supernatural enhancements. The demon engines deployed by contemporary word-bearer forces represent the pinnacle of their technical and theological achievement. These war machines house demon entities that have been bound through contracts negotiated over centuries, their supernatural inhabitants providing capabilities that transcend normal mechanical limitations. The engines can repair themselves through warp-based regeneration, adapt their weapon systems to counter specific threats, and coordinate their actions through psychic links that eliminate the communication delays that limit conventional military formations. The Word-Bearer's space fleet has grown throughout the millennia to encompass vessels that range from captured Imperial ships to purpose-built demon engines constructed in hidden shipyards throughout the Eye of Terror. Their capital ships incorporate design elements that exist partially in real space and partially in the warp, allowing them to utilize supernatural propulsion methods that can outmaneuver conventional Imperial vessels. The fleet's command ships serve as mobile temples where major rituals can be conducted even during active combat operations. The Legion's approach to planetary assault has evolved to emphasize corruption over destruction, recognizing that converted populations provide more long-term value than devastated wastelands. Their invasion forces typically include extensive contingents of missionaries and cultist auxiliaries, whose role extends beyond military support to encompass the establishment of permanent chaos institutions on conquered worlds. The assault doctrine prioritizes the capture of religious sites, communication centers, and educational facilities that can be converted into tools for ongoing theological indoctrination. The defensive strategies employed by word-bearer strongholds combine conventional fortifications with supernatural barriers that can repel both physical and psychic attacks. Their fortress worlds feature overlapping demon summoning circles that can manifest defensive entities within seconds of detecting hostile approach, while their communication networks utilize warp-based channels that remain functional even when conventional systems are jammed or destroyed. The fortifications incorporate self-repair mechanisms powered by demon entities that can restore damaged structures faster than conventional engineering methods. The Word-Bearer's intelligence operations in the current millennium encompass systematic monitoring of Imperial activities across the entire galaxy. Their networks include corrupted officials within every major Imperial institution, from planetary governments to the highest levels of the administratum itself. The intelligence gathered through these sources provides advance warning of Imperial military movements, while identifying opportunities for corruption or sabotage that can advance Chaos objectives without requiring major military commitments. The Legion's coordination with other Chaos forces reflects their role as theological authorities within the broader Chaos hierarchy. Word-bearer Dark Apostles serve as advisors to warband leaders throughout the galaxy, their expertise in demon summoning and warp manipulation providing capabilities that complement the tactical specializations of other Chaos factions. The theological guidance they provide helps coordinate the activities of diverse Chaos forces toward common strategic objectives while maintaining the doctrinal unity necessary for large-scale operations. The current threat posed by the Word-bearers to Imperial stability extends far beyond their direct military capabilities. Their corruption networks have created a galaxy-spanning conspiracy that operates within Imperial institutions at every level, from local planetary governments to the highest councils on Terra itself. The theological arguments they propagate through these networks present Chaos worship not as heretical rebellion, but as pragmatic acceptance of the galaxy's spiritual reality, making their doctrine particularly appealing to populations facing existential threats that Imperial authorities seem unable to address. The Word-bearer's vision for humanity's future encompasses the complete transformation of the species into willing servants of the Chaos gods. Their long-term strategy aims to create a galactic civilization where Chaos worship becomes the dominant religious framework, with human populations serving as both worshippers and warriors in an eternal crusade to spread their doctrine throughout the universe. This vision extends beyond simple conquest to encompass the fundamental restructuring of human society according to principles derived from communion with warp entities. The Legion's theological research continues to expand their understanding of how Chaos corruption can be applied to different species and environmental conditions. Their experiments on demon worlds have demonstrated that the transformation they seek for humanity can be adapted to encompass other intelligent species, suggesting that their ultimate goals extend beyond a single world or even a single galaxy. The knowledge they have gained through millennia of experimentation provides them with tools for spiritual conquest that exceed anything available to purely military organizations. The enduring strength of the Word-bearers lies not in their military might, but in their absolute conviction that their cause represents humanity's inevitable destiny. 10,000 years of warfare have only strengthened their faith in the Dark God's ultimate victory, while their success in corrupting Imperial institutions demonstrates that their methods can achieve results that conventional military conquest cannot match. As the galaxy burns in the fires of endless war, the Word-bearers continue their patient work of spiritual transformation, confident that time itself serves their cause and that humanity's conversion to Chaos worship represents not defeat but the fulfillment of its true potential. The 42nd millennium finds the Word-bearers stronger and more influential than at any point since the Horus heresy. Their networks span the galaxy, their doctrine spreads through countless populations, and their vision of universal Chaos worship grows closer to reality with each passing century. The Great Rift has provided them with opportunities that they have spent 10 millennia preparing to exploit, and their response demonstrates that they remain one of the most dangerous and persistent threats to Imperial survival. In a galaxy where hope itself has become a rare commodity, the Word-bearers offer an alternative that grows more appealing with each Imperial failure. ensuring that their influence will continue to expand until either the Imperium falls or the galaxy itself is consumed by the eternal war between order and chaos.